have Ms. Griffin take over the podium for a moment. You can leave your stuff there. She just needs to, welcome to do it from right there. You ready, Ms. Price? I didn't mean to jump right in there.
Yes, I am.
Okay. Or it's Ms. Convery. Whoever's going to tell me what specifically the state is seeking from the 4 media witnesses. Pardon me?
I have something in my mouth.
Well, we've established a precedent that even though mom says don't do that, especially apparently Mr. Harvey's mom, constantly, that explains a lot. So let's start with Mr. Diggs. So if Mr. Diggs were on the stand, you don't have to go question by question, but what are the things you want to ask Mr. Diggs about?
In a story that was published or that was aired, where Mr. Diggs was the reporter, he does an interview with the defendant, and the defendant makes certain representations about his relationship with Diane and his worth. Then it pans to Mr. Diggs speaking, and he says, he also said that the gun slipped out of his hand. We would like to call Mr. Diggs to indeed testify that he heard that from the defendant.
Okay. One of the requirements before we get a reporter to come up here to talk would be evidence that the party subpoenaing the reporter has exhausted all other possible sources of information. And it is alleged in the motions that there were other people around. Maybe it would be sheriff's deputies at that facility. It might have been not a Fulton County Sheriff's deputy. It might have been an employee of the municipality. I can't remember if it's Alpharetta, wherever it is. Have you looked into whether there are others who could say, I was there, and that's what Mr. McIver said?
At this point, I do not believe we have asked any of the sheriff deputies or anyone out in Alpharetta. Mr. Diggs represented the statement, so Mr. Diggs represented the statement, so we were looking to speak to him because he was the one reporting the story.
Okay, and I'm not limiting you just to that, but the primary thing would be, did Mr. McIver say the gun slipped out of his hand?
Yes.
Okay. Would you envision asking Mr. Diggs anything about content that was not presented in the interview?
No.
Okay. All right. How about Mr. Winnie?
I will have Mr. Rucker speak to you about what we would intend to elicit from Mr. Winnie's
Okay.
testimony.
As I understand, Mr. Winnie had the same opportunity. It was a interview while Mr. McIver was in custody.
Right. And as I understand the way those interviews are conducted, I don't know what Mr. Winnie and what Mr. Diggs has, being really facetious, on the sheriff's department, but they get like, it's unfettered kind of access. I mean, they get a photographer in there with the camera. And as I understand, the interview that we're interested in actually took place at Mr. McIver's cell. And I don't believe that there were any deputies like hovering over or any detention officers hovering over. I believe that they were some distance away and not really in a position to hear, so as not to obstruct Mr. Winnie in particular with his interview of the defendant, which was quite lengthy, that was published. And we would seek to ask Mr. Winnie about the defendant's statements regarding one, not having a motive, a financial motive very specifically.
And these would be things that Mr. Winnie says on the screen, you could all watch it, that Mr. McIver told him, as opposed to asking Mr. Winnie about things that, in theory, you could just show Mr. McIver saying?
No, actually, I believe that statement can be shown.
Okay.
If there were no objection from the defense, if we had a stipulation with respect to that, I think with Mr. Winnie's interview it in of itself contains the statements of the defendant. And so by playing the videotape, I think I would accomplish what my goal is.
Then what do you need Mr. Winnie for? Because then it may just be, we have a Rule 106 scenario we have to work through with the
Okay,
defense.
perhaps that's so. I just have not had an opportunity
Okay.
to speak to the defense about an agreement on that.
Okay.
I think it was brought up one time real early on by Ms. Clark Palmer, but we never nailed it down.
But in terms of, right now, I'm just focused on the media and the attorneys for these different representatives of the media. For Mr. Winnie, you may actually not need him, other than to authenticate it, but
Correct.
we wouldn't need him. I would be surprised if the pushback from the defense was, how do we know it's authentic, as opposed to 106 or something like that.
Right.
Okay, so then we have Mr. Schneider.
Right.
Are you the person to talk about Snyder?
Schneider, yeah.
Okay.
So, Mr. Schneider published a series of articles. He actually had many interviews with the defendant and the defendant's lawyer, Mr. Maples. One interview in particular talks about the events that surrounded the shooting itself, in which there are statements made by the defendant in the article, and then there are some places in the article where it's hard to determine if these are Mr. Schneider's words, or if it's the defendant's words, or if it's Mr. Maples' words, about how the gun actually discharged.
Because they're not quotations, right?
Correct.
All right.
There's a second article that at this point really becomes less of an issue because of the court's 404B ruling, but at the time that we actually filed it,
Sure.
That was one of the articles in which he interviewed the defendant, and he made statements that were inconsistent to statements he had made 30 years ago.
Okay, I think that came up even when we were working through the 404B. So
Right.
I'm remembering those.
Okay.
That might be for later on if we get there. But at a minimum, you would like to ask Mr. Schneider, this text in this article, this information came from where?
Right.
Okay. And the attorney is Maples that he's
Correct.
talking with, so it's Mr. McIver and Mr. Maples?
Yes, by name.
Okay. And the reason why you couldn't get this information through Mr. Maples, because it's not privileged.
He is on our witness list.
Okay. So
And
we might need to
so-
start with Mr. Maples before, this is my term, this necessity requirement
I understand.
of getting to the reporter. Here we have baked in someone that you could call to the stand, not Mr. McIver, but Mr. Maples, if in fact the way the article about how the gun was fired came together was Craig Schneider sitting down with Mr. Maples and Mr. McIver.
Right.
Okay.
And I think in forecasting that scenario, one thing I anticipated is if there is a denial by Mr. Maples, then where does that leave me? And
If
so,
Mr. Maples tells you, look, the only three people in the room were Schneider, McIver, and Maples, then you would be in a position to explain to the attorney for Mr. Schneider, we actually don't have another source. We have exhausted those.
Exactly.
Or we have another source and
Exactly.
it conflicts with
Right.
what's in our...
and that was what I was forecasting, so.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. And then we have Ms. Hobbs.
Right. So Ms. Hobbs is in a slightly different category, in my opinion, because Ms. Hobbs is the reporter who publishes the words of the defendant as related to her by Bill Crane.
Okay, she's the one who would add some context to Mr. Crane saying, I checked with the defendant, I checked with the Daily Report. Everyone agreed this is what ought to go in the article.
Correct.
Okay, and if Mr. Crane is impeached, or there's an effort to impeach him, that's
Correct.
crazy, Mr. McIver never told you that, then there may be communications with Ms. Hobbs.
Correct.
I'm recalling maybe that there would be emails that would reflect this, that it wouldn't necessarily require Ms. Hobbs to testify?
Well, I have never received any emails from Ms. Hobbs.
Okay.
And when I inquired of Mr. Crane, he was not able to provide any.
Okay, all right. So the inquiry with Hobbs wouldn't be so much, who are your sources, or was there
Correct.
material not in the article?
Correct.
It would be,
Not at all.
is this the procedure by which you obtain the information that you put in?
Right.
And the person who provided the information would also be someone who would be tested?
Again, the information you put in the article, these are not your words, but the words that provided to you by Mr. Crane.
Okay. I think what still remains in connection with Mr. Diggs and Mr. Winnie is for the state to make some inquiries
Other
with
folks.
the sheriff or whoever would be in charge at the North Annex, whatever we call it, to see who's involved. Ms. Counts kept saying the PIO was there, the Public Information Officer. I don't know if that would be the sheriff's PIO or the local jail's PIO. And I appreciate that's just Ms. Count saying it, but I assume there was a reason for saying it. So I'll need to get further representation from the state as to who else or no one else was in a position to hear what Mr. Diggs and Mr. McIver were saying, and then what Mr. Winnie and Mr. McIver were saying, although I'm hearing you say, really, you just want to press play on that broadcast.
Right.
And so we get into a
Because Mr. Winnie is no motive and guns are not my thing.
Sure. But those are words that come out of Mr. McIver's mouth.
That's correct.
According to you in the interview.
Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you. Mr. Samuel, I don't think it's quite ripe yet for you all to weigh in. Anything you want me to be thinking about? Not your issue yet.
Well, there's plenty of things we want to be thinking about, but not this.
Okay, trust I am, but in terms of this issue, no.
Not yet.
Okay. Well, thank you. I will be happy to hear back from the state whenever you gathered some info about the Morris Diggs interview. One thing for the general audience here, it's important for you all to realize there are no assigned seats here. It is first come, first serve. So if there's a particular place in this courtroom, other than the first row in the middle there, which is reserved for investigators and folks actually associated with the two sides, state and defense. Otherwise, this courtroom is available for anyone who shows up. But if someone is in a seat, that's that person's seat. So please don't adopt an attitude that you're entitled to a particular seat in the courtroom. It's a big old courtroom. There are plenty of seats. There has not been a time during this trial when there haven't been empty spaces in the courtroom. So I'm hearing that folks are concerned about where they're sitting. When we start at 9, there are about 3 people in here. So you can get the seats you want if you show up at 9. If you walk in at 11 and someone is sitting where you would like to sit, that's something to take note of. But please don't act like one of the seats in this courtroom is yours. If the jurors are ready, let's bring them in. Can you get Ms. Carter, please? Please. Hello again.
All rise for the jurors.
All jurors are present and accounted for, Your Honor.
Thank you, Deputy Murphy. You all can be seated. Welcome back, jurors. We were here at 1:10, just like you were ready at 1:10, but we needed to work through a couple of matters outside your presence, outside Ms. Carter's presence. And so that's why we've been waiting a little longer than what we had forecast. Something I need to see, or is that for you?
I'm just trying to make sense of it.
Okay. We'll talk about this later, but I appreciate you all making efforts, and it has to do with scheduling and how late folks can stay on days other than today. We're in at 5-ish today, like we discussed. But at the end of today, we'll talk more about that. But I appreciate the efforts everyone is making. We all lead complicated lives. Mr. Harvey, you told us you were leaving Longhorn and heading towards Atlanta.
Questions are there, exactly. We're at Longhorn.
Correct.
I'm about to leave.
Yes.
Let's get me back to where we were. When you and Diane and Tex leave Longhorn, Diane hands you the keys, as I understand it.
Yes.
She gets in the front passenger seat, correct?
Yes.
Tex gets in the back passenger seat.
Yes.
Now, both Tex and Diane had played golf that afternoon in the 90-degree September weather, correct?
Yes.
They both had a glass of wine, at least maybe a couple of glasses of wine each, correct?
Yes.
You had told us that you always had something to talk about
Yes.
with Diane.
Yes.
So you get in the car and you're driving.
Correct.
I'm assuming that since Diane is taller
Yes.
than you, you have to readjust the front seat.
Not really.
Okay? So you didn't have to make any readjustments. Do you know whether or not Diane made any readjustments on the passenger's seat?
No.
No, you don't know.
I don't know.
Okay.
Yes. Sorry.
But Tex, once again, is in the passenger seat in the rear.
Yes.
And y'all are driving back to Atlanta, and you and Diane are discussing matters,
Yes.
just general matters.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember anything in particular that you were discussing?
Oh, she was changing out her closets at the condo in Buckhead. It wasn't big enough for everything, so she had to change from winter to summer and then back. So we were talking about that, and we had scheduled appointments to work on her eyebrows on Thursday after she finished her closets.
You talk about work on her eyebrows. Some folks get permanent tattoos.
That's what I do.
on the
Yes.
eyebrows.
Uh-huh.
And you were trained to do that.
Yes.
And y'all were talking about getting Diane to do that.
Yes.
Do you recall talking about any other subjects?
The debates, again, we were talking about that, her brows, her closet.
I'm sorry.
I just know that those are some of the things that we talked about.
Okay. One of the things was the debates,
Yes.
which was a continuing talk between y'all.
Yes.
Do you remember talking about Ken Rickard?
Yes, we did. I'm not sure exactly at what point we did that. I cannot remember, but I believe that was in the conversation at one point.
Okay. Do you remember Mr. Rucker is very meticulous, and he's very thorough. He asked you about a number of conversations that you had with law enforcement.
Yes.
Okay. Some of them were in September of 2016, and I'll eventually get to those. Some of them were in February of 2017.
Yes.
Some of them were as recently as this weekend, and we'll ultimately get to those too. Do you remember telling Mr. Rucker that on the way between Longhorn and downtown Atlanta, that you had actually been talking about Ken Rickard? Do you remember that?
I remember talking about it. I don't remember exactly. I don't remember that I told him that that's where it was. So maybe my memory was better at that time. But
Just can't hear. Right, it's just saying read this right now.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying.
not there. Okay. Just-
One of the other subjects, does that refresh your recollection?
Yes, I do have a memory of talking about it. I just, right now, I just don't remember exactly where we were or what spurred that conversation.
Okay. Here's what you told Mr. Rucker.
Okay.
Do you remember this? We had been talking about Ken Rickard. Ken Rickard is who?
Diane's in-house attorney.
He is an in-house attorney at Corey, correct?
Yes.
He also does some work for Diane individually as well. He's a lawyer, right?
Yes.
Okay, you knew that, right?
Not specifically.
Okay. But you knew he was a lawyer.
Yes.
He was an in-house lawyer at least.
Yes.
Okay. And y'all had been talking, one of the subjects you had been talking about on the way from Longhorn to Atlanta was that Ken Rickard had accidentally fired a gun in his office at home.
Yes.
You remember that?
Yes.
And that Ken Rickard had accidentally fired a gun in his home, and it went off, and it kind of made him hard of hearing in one ear.
Yes, it did.
And that is exactly what a subject that you were talking about when you were coming from Atlanta coming to Atlanta from Longhorn. That you knew Mr. Rickard had unintentionally discharged a firearm, correct?
I don't know exactly what the circumstances were, what he was doing with the gun when he fired it, but the gun discharged.
I didn't ask you the circumstances.
Well, she hadn't finished answering your question.
Okay.
But the gun was fired in a small area and his hearing was diminished.
Okay, right. And you said Ken Rickard had accidentally fired a gun in his office at home, right? That's the words you used when you were talking to them?
Yes.
That subject had come up on the way home, on the way to Atlanta from Longhorn, right?
I don't know where it was. I don't know. It was sometime in the car, but I don't really remember. If I said it was from Longhorn to Atlanta that day, that's very possibly where it was. Right now, I couldn't tell you. If we were between Longhorn or between Atlanta and Piedmont Park, I don't know.
Well, in February of 2017, you told them that it was on the ride home. You said, oh, you know, this is what we talked about.
Yes, well,
Okay.
all that's on the ride home. I just don't know if it was between Longhorn and, well, you are saying that. I guess I'm thinking of, all the way to Buckhead.
No, on the way to Atlanta,
Okay.
correct? All right. And on the way back from Atlanta, you were talking, among other things, politics, correct?
Yes.
Did Mr. McIver, did he chime in on that conversation?
No.
So you were talking politics. Tex is in the back seat. He doesn't say anything at all because Tex was asleep, wasn't he?
I don't know if he was asleep or not.
Well,
I never looked back there, but he wasn't talking.
he wasn't talking, and we had talked a bunch this morning about when politics comes up, Tex is part of that conversation, correct?
Yes.
And you remember talking with Detective Smith. You remember talking with Detective Smith that day, and you knew that was audio and video recorded, correct?
Yes.
And do you remember, page 23, specifically telling Detective Smith on 9/26 of 2016 that, and I quote, "and Tex was asleep." Do you remember that? Not, oh, I don't know what he was doing, not that I don't remember what he's doing, oh, it's possible that he was asleep. It was, and Tex was asleep. Remember that?
Talking to Detective Smith?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So we're riding back towards Atlanta. Tex was asleep in the back. You and Diane are talking. Tex doesn't say a word. Correct?
Correct.
You get off I-20. You get off I-20 and you start coming up 75. We saw the video that you've explained to us, right? The Google Earth thing,
Yes.
right? When did you see that, by the way? This weekend?
I did see it this weekend, yes.
So the first time you saw that was this weekend,
Yes.
correct? All right. And when you got to the signs that you saw, you got to the connector down there, before you even got to the first exit, your words, it was a parking lot.
Yes.
It wasn't it. The traffic wasn't going anywhere, correct?
Correct.
The traffic wasn't going anywhere, and it looked to you, didn't it, that if you just stayed on the expressway, you'd be sitting there forever.
Yes.
And did you say we got to get off here, or did Diane say let's get off here?
I did.
Okay, so it's a parking lot. You're on 75, and it's your suggestion that you get off there to see if you can go, and and I'm going to use this, the back roads or other roads, in order just to shoot up to Buckhead, correct?
Yeah, my words were to Peachtree.
Right. You were thinking Peachtree, but you can shoot up on Peachtree, you can shoot up on Piedmont, correct?
Yes.
And Diane said, just get off here.
Yes.
Now, that was the Auburn, Edgewood, maybe something else exit, correct? And as you're coming down off the expressway, your idea Tex is awakening, correct?
Yes.
Because you had told us Tex was in fact asleep. You know, and that's where Diane was kind of fussing at him, because he had been asleep, correct?
Yes, that was before we got off the exit.
Yes, and he was, we decided to get off, and he was still asleep when you got off, and then he was coming away because Diane was fussing at him.
Yes.
And you said, get off, let's get off, you want to get off this road,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And it was Diane that was saying to Tex, wake up, right?
Yes.
And it's there that Tex comes out of his sleeping state and said, you know, I think this is a bad idea, girls. This is a bad area, right?
Yes.
And that's when he says, darling, that word again, darling, this is a bad area. I wish you hadn't have done this. Girls, speaking to both of you, right?
Yeah. And he said girls.
Girls, would you hand me my gun? Darling, would you hand me my gun?
Yes.
And you said, Tex, what are you talking about? Why do you need your gun? You don't need to get your gun out. Why would you do that? That's what you said?
No.
Diane said, Tex, what are you doing?
No.
You don't need a gun. Why would you get a gun out? You didn't say anything.
No.
Diane didn't say anything.
No.
Did Diane carry a gun?
Yes.
Okay. So she was a gun toter as well, correct?
Yes.
All right. And you understand that Diane, had her own weapons as well, correct?
Correct.
She had her own weapons at the ranch. She had her own weapons at the condo, correct?
I don't know if any of them were hers at the condo. She had one in her car.
All right. She carried a weapon in her car as well.
Yes.
All right. But the suggestion that that Tex said when he said, "Darling, hand me my gun, please," and that's what prompted the opening of the console, because Diane said, "Well, where's your gun?"
She said, I don't know where your gun is.
And he said, "It's in the console."
Correct.
And the console was open, and Diane opened the console, and you couldn't see the gun because it was in a bag, really. It was laying on top of stuff on in the console, right? You had told us before that when you had seen the gun in that vehicle in that King Ranch, the gun was just there on top and you could see it when you opened the console, right?
Correct.
So if somebody was breaking into a car and was stealing guns, which happens all the time in the city of Atlanta, if you open the console and you don't automatically see a gun, that might prevent a gun theft and getting another gun out on the street, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, opens the console, and nobody reevaluates. Neither one of y'all say, "Nah, you know, Tex, I've thought about it. I'm not going to give you a gun. Don't do that."
No.
Okay. And Diane takes the the gun and hands the gun to Tex
Yes.
without any hesitation,
Without any hesitation.
without any commentary.
She didn't say anything.
Okay, that's what I mean. And without any protestations.
That's true.
You were stopped at the off-ramp on Edgewood, correct?
Yes.
Across from the off-ramp at Edgewood, there is an area right across the street under the underpass, correct? There's a fenced-in area around the underpass underneath Edgewood.
If you don't know
If you
that
don't
there is,
know.
you should say so.
I'm sorry.
That's okay, that
I'm
was
trying
sort
to-
of a question.
Okay, comma wasn't there.
I don't know if there's a fenced-in area there.
Okay.
I don't recall seeing that.
Right. And at that time, do you remember describing Tex's state of awareness as he was kind of awake?
Well, he was waking up as we were.
Well, do you remember in the
He was
state?
awake when we stopped at the light.
In the statement on 9/26 of 2018 to Detective Smith, do you remember Detective Smith asking you, was he kind of awake at that point, or was he like fully awake? And you said, no, was kind of awake. Detective Smith says, okay, like he was kind of awake, you said. You didn't say it just once. You said it twice. You remember that?
No.
Want me to show you?
No.
Okay. Would you disagree that that's what you said?
If that's what's down there, that's
Well,
what I said.
sure. One of the things that you were trying to do is answer Detective Smith's questions, correct?
Yes, in a very distressed state.
What you were trying to do was answer Detective Smith's questions, correct?
Right.
Yeah, don't shake your head at her answer, right? She's gonna answer and then that's the answer, but the body reaction, I don't think is appropriate.
And then to re-ask the question.
Right, she answered your question.
Because Clint doesn't re-ask questions.
And because you don't object when he re-asks questions. Next question.
And when a question was asked of you, you were trying to give an appropriate answer, were you not?
Yes.
After Tex had received the bag with the gun in it, y'all took a left, correct?
Yes.
Went under the underpass,
Correct.
correct? It went straight for about a block or two until you reached Piedmont. Correct?
Yes. I know that now.
Big pardon?
I know that now.
Okay. Well, you've identified that for us. You've shown us the route that you took. You were also asked about people you may have seen. Okay?
Yes.
This is a little bit out of order. But I want to take you back to at least the day that you, this is the 26th, the day that you made a number of statements. just generally speaking, I'll get there chronologically later. What happens was, you were at the hospital, and when you were at the hospital, several APD employees, police officers, came in and yeah, I know, and I'm not going, that's why I said, stick with me, I'm not going chronologically, okay? What happened was, you left the hospital at that time. The APD them.
Yes.
And they took you with them in order to find out where the incident had occurred.
Yes.
And you went in their car, their vehicle with them.
I did.
All right. And an officer named Riker was driving. You remembered his name, correct?
Yes.
And you were in the front seat?
Yes.
And you were talking to Officer Riker in the front seat while you were doing this drive, correct?
Yes.
So the first time that you were explaining, or that you ever explained what happened, was during the ride when you got taken from the hospital to show the officers the route. Because they were asking, where did you go? Where were you? You were answering questions about where you were and the route you had taken and what in part had happened, correct?
No, we did not talk about that.
All right. Do you recall telling in this ride, do you recall telling Officer Riker during this ride that while driving north on 85 heading toward Buckhead, Diane told her to get off the highway and take the back roads instead of sitting in the traffic?
We did, I had to tell them the directions that we were going, yes. So I did tell them the directions of where we had been. We did not get into the event.
Right. During the ride, you didn't get in the event.
No,
Right.
the officer in the back made a statement about that.
Well, she got off the first exit north of 20. This is you talking to Riker. You remember telling him that during the ride?
Not really.
Okay. Do you remember stating to Officer Riker, and I quote, she stated that there were a lot of scary people standing at the intersections and that they kept getting stuck at every red light?
You can answer that maybe in a minute. You keep saying she said. Are you saying that this witness said that Ms. McIver said this?
No.
Or you are quoting a police officer's language as if they are somehow
Yes.
this witness's words?
Yes.
And I object.
Well, I'm asking whether she remembers saying that to
But she said she didn't
Riker.
have, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Keep going, Mr. Harper.
All right.
No, I don't mean keep going with the questions. Why do you think it's appropriate to read aloud what an officer wrote down as opposed to asking her, did you tell the officer X, Y, Z?
Okay, that's fine. Then I'll just do that, a la Mr. Rucker. Let me change that question.
Okay.
Do you remember telling Officer Riker that there were a lot of scary people standing at the intersections and that you all kept getting stuck at every red light?
I'm going to object before she answers the question. I believe that the witness, first of all, the question is really confusing because the witness has already stated that during the ride, they did not get into any details. So,
Well,
I think
that's what she said, and in light of that answer, I think the questions are appropriate. I was taking issue with the way they were being presented, literally read aloud from someone else's statement, basically.
Right.
So he's addressed that.
Right.
But I think based on that answer. I'm going to ask one clarifying question.
Okay.
Ms. Carter, when you said that the incident wasn't discussed, do you mean the actual firing of the gun, or do you mean nothing was discussed at all about the drive?
The shooting of the weapon.
Okay. You can keep going. That just helps me understand what was meant.
Do you remember telling Officer Riker that Mr. McIver asked Diane to hand him the gun from the center console for their safety? If you don't remember.
I don't remember.
All right.
I don't
Do you-
remember.
Sorry. Do you remember telling Officer Riker during this ride period that Claude was asleep and then fell back asleep with the gun? And I'll get that to that in a minute. Do you remember telling him that?
No, I don't remember talking to him about that.
Or him that you were driving north on Piedmont when you heard the gun go off?
No.
Do you remember telling them that this is Riker during the drive, that you noticed soon after the gun going off that Diane had been shot?
No.
And that you were not 100% sure how to get to the closest hospital?
I don't remember telling him.
The text said go to Emory.
I don't remember talking to him about that.
Okay.
I remember talking to him about certain things, but not that.
So you go under the underpass, and this is where Mr. McIver gets the weapon. You've told Detective Smith once that he was asleep. Now you said twice, kind of awake, right?
That was to Darren Smith.
Right.
Yes.
So you go under the underpass, then you take a right on Piedmont, correct?
Correct.
You get on Piedmont, and as we know, you just keep driving straight on Piedmont.
Yes.
Not a peep, not another peep from Tex McIver, right?
Right.
But y'all are talking.
Yes.
Tex hadn't said another word,
No.
right? He's in the back.
Yes.
You guys are chatting, you're going north on Piedmont.
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember that you were also talking politics?
We were talking about debates.
Okay, the debates, right?
We're excited to see them.
All right. You were getting excited to see them. As I said before, it was an election year. You guys were talking in the front seat. And do you remember telling the Detective Smith that if he, Tex, had been awake, he'd have been talking
Yes.
because it was politics?
Yes, I did remember that.
Okay. So at that particular point, you didn't hear another word from him. Y'all were talking about politics, and you were going down Piedmont. Now you know that you passed 10th Street, right?
We stopped at a light there, yes.
Okay. Well,
Passed.
10th. And I think that's where you told us, isn't that where the Flying Biscuit?
I know that
Yes.
now. I couldn't tell
Well,
what sign.
You said that yesterday, so let's assume that it's where the Flying Biscuit is. That's 10th, you've identified that for us. Now, yesterday you told us, well, I don't know. I don't know whether it was 12th or 14th where we stopped,
I don't,
right? Now, you were here Saturday, right?
yes,
You were here Sunday,
yes.
right? The state showed you some exhibit, they showed you a video of the drive, or the Google of the drive, right? Did they show you the vehicle passing 12th Street? Just wait 1 second, just wait 1 second. Did they show you that? Did they show you the ranch, the King Ranch passing 12th Street?
No,
Right, because you know when you told us that the shot went off, you were behind somebody, right?
right,
And what you did was you put on your blinkers, you know, the emergency lights, and it was blinking, and you were honking, you were trying to get people to move, right?
yes.
All right. Did they show you, and what's the state's exhibit what? 233, can we play, please? Will you watch? I don't know whether it comes up on that screen, but you're welcome to come down and look at it on a bigger screen.
Why don't you stay where you are and be on that screen? If you have trouble seeing it there, then you can come on that, but we'll hear you better here.
Okay, I think I can see it.
You can see it okay there? Can you stop it when I ask? Right, is that it? Is that it?
Looks like it.
Can we back it up? All right, let's stop. Let's hold it right there. Move it forward just a tad. All right, that shows 12th Street, right?
Yes,
All right. We just went straight through 12th Street,
right.
correct?
Uh-huh.
Were there did you see any blinkers? Did you see any flashing lights?
Not that I could tell.
Okay. So we know that you passed through 12th Street without any blinkers, without any flashers. Don't see any cars beside you at that particular point. We know approximately, we hope, what time it is.
You asking me?
Yes,
I don't know what time it was.
Can you see on the exhibit, 2200, 19 seconds?
Okay. I don't know what time that is in my time.
In your time?
Yes.
Well, you go from 12 o'clock, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you add, how many hours do you get to 22?
You said you'd keep the math simple today.
Yes, please.
That's double digits.
10:19?
Well,
Would that be right?
it'd be approximately 10 o'clock,
10
correct?
o'clock.
All right. And you weren't stopped, the flashers, the blinkers weren't running. So 12th Street couldn't have been where you stopped, could it?
Doesn't appear that way. I've never
Okay.
been able to
Great.
determine that.
But now we know because we've got a video. The state had the video. The state didn't show you the video this weekend. So we know it wasn't 12th Street. And we know that as of approximately 10 o'clock, you were just passing 12th. Okay?
That was a question?
Right, comma, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Next question.
Yes. The next street with a light is 14th. So can we agree now that it's 14th Street where you stopped?
Yes.
All right. 14th Street where you stopped, isn't there the gate to Piedmont Park right there?
I believe so.
And one of the things that you told the officers when you were doing the ride-through was that it was right at Piedmont Park. Remember that? And that would be right at 14th.
Yes.
Okay. And 14th is split. There are 2 lanes that go straight. We talked about that yesterday. And there are 2 lanes on the left that turn to the left. You were going straight.
Yes.
So you had to be in the right 2-hand lanes, correct?
Yes.
And there is a concrete island in the middle there, is there not?
Yes.
Okay. So if you're on 14th, you're there and you're waiting at the light at 14th, correct?
Correct.
And how long do you think you were waiting there at the light at 14th?
A minute.
All right, so we know you go through 12, you know you get to 14th, you know we're stopped at 14. We know that Diane is playing with the locks.
Yes.
Tex still hasn't said a word.
No.
Diane's playing with the locks, you hear the click, click, click. You're going, okay, I'm gonna lock my doors too. And you lock your doors, correct?
I locked all of them.
Okay, you lock all of them. It was just something that you did at that particular point, correct?
Yes.
Now, at that point, you know that Tex had gone back to sleep.
I assume.
Well, once again, when you were when you were talking with Detective Smith, you remembered, and I'll show you if you want, you told him, I'm sure he went to sleep with the gun in his hand. Remember telling Detective Smith that?
I don't remember saying that, but I assumed that he was asleep.
All right, but I'm not asking you what you assumed. The question before you is, do you remember telling Detective Smith that?
She said she didn't remember that.
Okay, that's fine. Were you shown a video of your statement this weekend?
Yes. No, not this weekend. A couple of weeks ago.
A couple of weeks ago, were you given a transcript?
Yes, but something happened with it. And the odd pages, I don't know if that was the one, the even pages. I didn't have them all. The whole transcript.
Well, do you think that if I showed you the transcript page, it would refresh your recollection?
No, I believe you. I just don't remember exactly what I said. If I said I assumed he was sleeping or that he was.
And again, one of the reasons that you believe, as we went over this morning, that he was asleep and you were sure that he was asleep is because you ladies were talking about politics, and Tex hadn't piped up a word. You hadn't heard a word from him.
He was quiet.
Okay. He hadn't said anything,
Yes.
and you had been talking about politics, among other things,
Yes.
and that you had told us and you told Detective Smith that if you were talking about politics, I'm sure he was asleep because he would have said something, correct?
That's what I deduced.
Okay. That was when you heard the boom.
Yes.
You didn't know what happened.
No, I did not realize it was a gunshot.
You didn't know whether or not you had been hit from the side, or what?
I didn't know if I was going to be. I didn't know where the explosion was. I didn't know what made the noise.
Right. You didn't know what happened. And of course, inside the vehicle, it's a loud noise, correct?
Very loud.
And surely it startled you and it startled, everybody, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And one of the things that you thought about, I'm going to talk about Ken Rickard again. Right here, you told Mr. Rucker and you told the state is a weapon was discharged inside of the car. And this is one, do you remember telling them that it was one thing that you had forgotten about, and that Ken Rickard had accidentally fired a gun in his office at home?
Warren covered this part, so.
Yes, well,
Yes, but-
because that's what now I'm asking about. This was the time that she also thought of that. So it's a different question
Okay.
because it's a different time sequence.
The question is, at the time of the boom, did you reflect back upon the situation with Ken Rickard?
I don't think so. No, I was just concerned with what had gone on in the car.
Well, do you remember telling the state that when the gun went off, you realized that, and you thought that there was a bullet hole in the floor,
I did think of it, yes.
and that you thought and you told them, the state, that, oh gosh, here we go.
I don't remember if I said that.
And do you remember thinking that now Tex would be in the same boat Ken was in about discharging a weapon?
When was that? I know that I probably said that, but I don't recall when. In one of my interviews with Mr. Rucker?
Yes, that was,
Okay. I was thinking we were still with Darren Smith for some reason.
no, I said you remember telling them.
Okay. Yes, when I remembered that conversation, because it didn't, and my brain was so foggy, I was in shock for 2 months, I didn't remember everything exactly.
Sure. But that's what you told them, correct?
Yes,
That was in the same interview that you had, not the lawyer that's here today or that's been here today. You get a lawyer here today, right?
yes,
All right, and he's been sitting here for the last couple of days, right?
yes,
But you had a different lawyer, when you went to meet with them before, correct?
yes,
Some dude named Jeremy,
yes,
all right? And you said that Jeremy was just a friend of your
he's a
nephew.
friend of my nephew's.
Right, but Jeremy was there during the interview, correct?
Yes, I can't remember what date that was. It was a couple of months afterwards.
Yes. In February of 2017, and Jeremy was telling and talking to the state about the scope of his representation, that he was representing you with regard to the will and perhaps a challenge to the will. Not that he was your nephew's lawyer, and he was just along to hold your hand, but that he was representing you.
I guess he and my nephew had spoken about that. I never talked to him about it. We met there that day. I had not met him until we got there.
Sure, and he's sitting there, talking to the state on your behalf, telling them that he represents you with regard to the scope of the will and whether or not you were going to challenge the will, the 2006 will. You could have said, yo, Jeremy, hold on.
Is
No.
that a question? Are we
Well, you-
testifying?
Right.
Well,
Well,
yeah.
it's both.
Yeah.
I think there's probably going to say comma right after I finish testifying, so just ask the question.
Comma correct.
please.
Right. You were sitting there at that time. Jeremy, weren't you?
Yes,
Jeremy was sitting there at the same conversation, correct?
yes,
And Jeremy was making representations to the state on your behalf, wasn't he?
yes. I don't remember him saying that, but I'm sure if it's down there, if he did that.
But you never said, did you? Jeremy, no, or Mr. Rucker, no, or anybody else, no. That's not the case. This is just some dude that is showing up with me because my nephew, you represented my nephew. You didn't stop what he said.
No,
And he, that Jeremy guy, representing himself as your lawyer, was engaged in a colloquy, he was engaged in conversation with the state, wasn't he?
yes.
So we're going back to 14th Street. We're at 14th Street. We know the time stamp when we cross 12. We're stopped at a light for we don't know how long, however that long that light might last. At 14th, we're playing with the locks. The
Just ask your next question instead of recapping the last 30 minutes, please.
Okay, and as long as you interrupt Mr. Rucker when he does the same thing, I'll move to my next question.
Okay.
The next thing that happens is you don't know what has happened, right?
Right.
But you know there's smoke.
Yes, I noticed that when I turned after Diane asked, Tex, what did you do?
Okay. Diane says, Tex, what did you do?
And spun around in the seat to look at
Well,
that.
turned in her seat, correct?
Yes,
Looking back at Tex, right? And there was a loud boom and there's smoke in the vehicle, correct?
yes.
And it was at that particular point that Tex said, I discharged a bullet. I was asleep.
He said he had discharged the gun. I don't remember him saying I was asleep.
Once again, your statement to Detective Smith on 9/26.
Are we refreshing the recollection?
I'll be glad to.
Okay. What page, counsel?
37.
Thank you.
So this is with Detective Smith. Okay. Yeah, I see it here.
Okay. Does that refresh your recollection about what you told Detective Smith on 9/26 of 2016?
Not right now, but if I said that, I said
Well,
I'm sure.
that's,
Not, no.
Okay. Was one of the transcripts that you have been provided, whether complete or incomplete, the 9/26/16 transcript? Is that one of the transcripts you were provided?
Yes, there were two that were incomplete, and I did get complete ones.
Did you, if you didn't have a complete one, did anything prevent you from asking Mr. Rucker when you saw him however many times, this Saturday, this Sunday, Mr. Rucker, Mr. Abate, or anybody, can you get, I don't have a full transcript,
Yeah,
can you give me one?
I did get them.
Okay. Well, did you review that portion?
I did review that portion, and I reviewed all of them. I've got stacks about like that. And I'm just telling you right now, I don't remember saying that. But I'm sure I did, because it's recorded there.
Okay. We're there. The, Diane says, Tex, what did you do? Tex responds, correct? I discharged a bullet. I was asleep.
Have we plowed this ground, Judge?
Yes, and we're gonna go to the next question.
Okay.
The next thing you see when you turn around is Tex with the bag in his hand, correct?
I saw his hands. I saw his hands and the gun and the bag in his hand. And his
Okay.
hands were moving.
Okay, his hands were moving. The gun, I think you told us, was pointed towards the ground,
Yes.
towards the floor.
Yes.
And his hands were moving. You showed us some movement yesterday. And it was his right hand that was moving, and the gun was in his left hand. Wasn't it?
No.
No. Do you remember, again, telling the officers or
hold on one second.
No. Okay.
well, yesterday when you showed us the movement, you had it was your right hand moving. Wasn't it?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
No, I was doing like that. If the hand that was moving was the hand that was closest to me, which would have been his left hand.
Do you, hold on one second, please. Come back to that. But do you remember telling anybody that the gun was in his left hand?
No, I remember one day I was doing the motion and I said, well, I thought, no, it was not that. It was not this. It was that. It was the hand that was closest to me.
Do you remember telling them, I guess, on February 2nd of 2017, around 4:30,
Them being,
the state, them, that hand, that the gun would have been in his left hand? Do you remember telling them that?
I remember telling somebody that
Okay.
because I was doing that. And then I knew that Tex was right-handed, so it was, I was doing this, me.
But your recollection about what you told them is that when you saw it, the bag or the butt of the gun, not the full gun, it was in his left hand and he was doing that with his right hand, regardless of which hand he is, and you, correct?
And then I corrected myself.
Oh, show me if you'll read this.
So you're giving her one page? Do you want to give her more than one page, or do
No.
you think that covers it?
I think that covers it.
Because I was doing that. And that was the action that I had come up with, because that's what I was doing. So, yes, I would say that.
Did you correct yourself?
Not on that page.
Okay, do you recall correcting yourself on it? Anywhere else?
I
You
don't
can
know
tell me
where,
where and I'll look for it.
I don't know where it was.
Everybody was stunned, right?
Yes,
You were stunned and you tried not to panic, right?
yes,
You weren't yelling,
no,
you weren't screaming.
no.
You, I know, were trying to figure out what happened and what to do, right?
Well, once she said she was shot,
You didn't know at first
no,
because she turned and it was a normal turning movement, at least in your perception, correct? There didn't look to be anything amiss when she turned.
no.
And she said, "Tex, what did you do?" And you're thinking, "Oh man, storms are brewing,"
When I realized that it was a gun and it had gone off, yes.
right? And you thought, "Oh, you know, if Tex was ever the brunt of Diane's ire, it was gonna be now."
Yes,
Because it was such a unusual event
yes,
that Diane was just going to go to town
yes,
on Tex.
yes,
So she turns, you're thinking, uh-oh. And then she turns back around, correct?
yes,
And says, "I think, Tex, you shot me."
yeah, after
Right.
she kind of squirms in the seat.
Yeah, that squirms in the seat. And you thought she was joking.
For a second.
Well, yes. The first thought was she was joking. A gun had gone off. You had perceived her turning in a normal fashion, what you thought to be a normal fashion. Then you didn't see any blood, did you?
No,
You didn't see any wounds,
no,
did you? You didn't see any other indicia, you didn't see anything that would indicate to you that she was in fact shot, right?
correct.
Until she started fading, and I'm using that term, she started, I guess, wiggling and breathing in a different fashion, and said, "Tex, you shot me."
Well, for a second after that, I thought that she was joking, and then I realized, it was before she started panicking. I thought, I don't know where that bullet is. I thought that it was in the floor of the car, or through the floor in the car, and then, and I realized, bullets can ricochet, they can go different places. I didn't know where it was.
And when you say bullets can ricochet and they can go different places because they hit intermediate objects.
Correct.
They can hit all sorts of objects and go in all sorts of directions, correct?
Yes.
I mean, you know that. You told us you're a gun shooter and a gun enthusiast, and you've shot guns before, correct?
Yes.
And you know about the ricochet effect, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So but you didn't know what happened, and you couldn't see or tell what happened.
No.
There wasn't like a bunch of blood coming out of Diane McIver's, and I'm sorry to have to go through this. You didn't observe anything happening, correct?
No.
And by the way, you didn't observe anything happening from the time that this happened all the way to the hospital. I mean, you didn't see, there wasn't a big pool of blood. There wasn't blood on her shirt. There wasn't blood dripping down. There wasn't any of that you observed between 14th Street and Emory Emergency Room.
Well, I didn't look, I didn't try to.
Okay. So the answer is you did not observe anything, correct?
Correct.
You were concentrating on getting to a hospital,
Yes.
correct? And you were concentrating and working hard at not panicking,
Yes.
okay? And concentrating on the tasks at hand.
Correct.
And that took some effort to do.
A lot.
Okay. And other folks can do the same kind of thing. They can concentrate on not panicking and to try to deal as best as they can with the situation. Right?
Yes.
Okay. You didn't say, call 911. You didn't say that.
No.
Nobody said, call 911. Correct?
Correct.
All right. So both you and Tex, neither one of you said 911, and in fact said call 911. And in fact, you thought, and you expressed to the state, and you expressed to under oath that, I thought about it, but what was I going to tell them? I didn't really know precisely where I was, and that, boy, I'm going to tell 911 a location at which I don't know where I am, and I'm going to sit here, and I'm going to wait for someone to come while my friend is dying. That's what you thought, correct?
Yes, I thought that probably somewhere around Piedmont Jogging Club. The first thing that I said was, Tex, where's the closest emergency room?
Right. And you thought Piedmont, but you didn't know how to get there because you had to go through the winding roads in the Prado, right? Right. And Tex said, Emory, let's go to Emory, right?
Yes.
All right. So you zoom down Piedmont, and the botanical gardens are on the right, correct? And you go to Monroe, right?
Right.
All right. And Monroe is maybe, I don't know, a half a mile away. Right, and you're zipping at least 50.
Probably.
Okay, so that's 30 seconds away. You get to Monroe, you blow through Monroe, and right past Monroe, one of the things that's there is a mark this as defendant's exhibit, whatever.
rise from whatever?
15,
15.
15W, 15 whatever. I'm going to hand you what's been marked as defendant's exhibit number 15. Right past Monroe, if you're zipping down Piedmont, there's an Emory Hospital sign right there, isn't there?
Yes.
So within 20 seconds, all right, I'm going to move admission of defendant's 15W.
No objection. If you're ready.
Help me. I'm showing you on the screen defendant's exhibit number 15. This is the sign that you just identified for us, right?
Yes.
This is the sign right before you turn to Morningside, right past Monroe, right?
Correct.
So the sign that you actually see, the place that you actually are headed to, you run right into a sign that says Emory Hospital, and that's the way you go, right?
Yes, I don't know that. I have tunnel vision. I was just listening to Tex telling me which way to turn.
Okay, and you were also listening to Tex holding Diane's head, holding her up, really,
Yes.
kind of secure. Do you know, have you ever heard the term ABC?
No. I mean, not in the context that you're referring to, I'm sure.
Yeah, I wasn't referring to it as learning alphabet, but in life-saving or medical term.
No.
Well, even at that particular point, Diane, you want to keep Diane's breathing apparatus as clear as possible, right?
Yes.
Tex was holding Diane, holding her still as best as you could, in your estimation, is that right?
I wasn't paying attention to him.
But
I
he
knew
was,
that
I'm
he was
sorry.
holding her head.
Okay. And we already talked about it. But there wasn't any visible signs of what happened, right?
We did already talk about it.
Okay. And Tex was talking to Diane. Diane, correct?
Not at that moment, not the Morningside.
When you first started, he leaned forward. He showed us yesterday. He was holding her, and he was saying, Diane,
Yes.
right? Right. And he held her as best as he could all the way to the hospital, correct?
Yes.
And Tex was telling you which way to go to get to the hospital, correct?
Yes.
And did, at the time that you met with Mr. Rucker and you met with them this weekend, did they show you the video from the Emory Hospital valet?
Yes.
Right. So you know what time that y'all arrived.
I've been told I don't.
When you saw it, do you remember what you saw?
Well, I know it was 10 o'clock when we went through that. Through the traffic light. No, I don't remember what
Through the
time it
traffic
was.
light at 12.
She just said she doesn't remember what time it was.
And when you watch the video at Emory, you know that Tex got out before the car even stopped. You saw him rapidly coming towards the entrance. And you know he was yelling, gunshot, help.
I thought he yelled Bernie, but because I was in the car, I couldn't hear. I knew he yelled something.
But he got out before the car even stopped. right? You saw that.
It looked that way.
It did look that way.
Yeah.
Okay, well, there's a video.
I wasn't looking back there, so, I mean, I saw the video. I thought that,
I'm asking you what you saw in the video.
What she saw in the video is not, the video is the video. You asked her what she recalled. She said, I didn't recall it that way. Then you asked if she saw the video.
Right.
She told you what it looked like.
Okay, and did that refresh your recollection as to what happened?
yes,
Okay, so then you saw Tex get out of the car before the car stopped, run towards the entrance, correct?
I actually thought the videos, when I was watching them, what the timing was on the video, how much it was slowed down. And then they told me it was real time.
So it was real time. That's not what I asked you.
So it looked weird to me. So it was like it was kind of jumpy.
Did you see Tex assist Diane in the wheelchair?
Yeah,
Did you see Tex assist Diane along with the other folks there, keeping her leg up and bringing her into the hospital, correct?
I did.
All right, so we know that the car coming is on video, right?
Yes,
We know that you were driving the car, correct?
correct.
We know that Tex was out of the car and Diane was not able to drive, correct?
Correct.
Because she was in the passenger side. We know that the car came forward and stopped, correct?
Yes,
We know that you were driving and got out and handed the keys to the valet, correct?
yes,
And when you handed the keys to the valet, you went in, correct? And if the outside surveillance kept going, we would see you come in, correct?
I did, yes.
Now, all of this is before you went into the hospital.
Yes.
Do you remember one second. Do you remember ever saying to Mr. Crane that it took about 7 minutes from where the shot occurred to get into Emory?
I don't recall saying that to him, but I don't know if I did.
Okay. Now, once in, Tex had already talked to folks, told them what he needed, and they had taken Diane inside, correct?
Yes,
All right. You went in, correct?
yes,
And you joined Tex where?
in the hallway outside of the bay where she was, the emergency bay.
Okay. And at that particular point at the bay, who was there?
Tex.
It was just Tex, correct?
It seems like there was someone else standing there, but it wasn't anyone that had anything to do with us.
All right. It was you and Tex standing in that area,
Yeah.
right? Did anybody come up to you and request any information? Do you remember?
Not at that point.
Were you directed to go to a certain place?
Not right away.
All right, how long do you think you stood there?
We stood out there for a little while. He said something about them wanting to take her to Emory. Brady.
And that was the extent of the conversation that you had there?
Yes.
And then where did you go?
To the small waiting room that was very close to the.
Come in and you got valet, you got to take a left and then a right?
Correct.
Okay. You've kind of seen those pictures in the scan of that. And then it was, I don't know, a few minutes later that you were sitting in there, correct?
Yes.
And when you were sitting in there, after having driven up and after having gone through all that, is this where Tex starts talking to you about not wanting to get you involved?
Not at that moment.
All right. Well, was
that's
there?
where we were.
Okay. And before that, he was saying, was he not, that he just, and I'm going to use these words, I'm going to use your words, he felt like shit. That's what he said.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
All right. And he said, I feel horrible. Right?
I don't know if he said I feel horrible. I'm sure I said he does. I'm sure.
Again, on 926, we haven't gotten there yet chronologically. This is in the statement to Riker and the other gentleman. Do you remember telling them he was just, well, do you remember telling them that Tex said, oh my God, I feel like horrible. Remember telling them that?
No.
Do you remember telling them this is just awful?
I don't remember that right now. I'm sure that if that's in the statement, that's what I said.
Do you remember him talking to you about his service in Vietnam?
Yes, that's
I'm going to let you answer.
yes,
That was at this time.
yes,
So at this time you're saying, I feel like shit. I feel horrible. It reminds me of my service in Vietnam. Right?
yes,
That's what he was talking about.
yes,
Is that right? It was at the time that you asked about the chaplain?
no,
All right. Do you remember telling them that I asked him if he wanted the chaplain to come in at that time?
somebody asked me if I wanted to see the chaplain.
Do you remember whether you told Riker that you asked Tex at that point to if he wanted the chaplain?
Yes,
Okay. And what he said was, I hope we don't need it.
yes,
Okay. Now, so before this conversation that you told us about, Tex had made all those statements to you, correct? And you all were still sitting there. The chaplain hadn't come in.
no,
That was the content of the conversation before this conversation that Tex had with you.
yes,
he was telling you about how bad he felt and what kind of memories it brought back, right?
That he was reminded of something in Vietnam, and I couldn't really relate.
Okay, all right.
And
And then, in the middle of that conversation, having helped his wife, his gunshot wife coming in, knowing that y'all had been on video, this is the time that he says, just tell him you're here as a family friend.
it was not then.
It was not then, okay. What was the next conversation you had with Tex?
With Tex?
Yeah.
Well, I kind of went back and forth in and out of the room several times.
And he was sitting there by himself?
Yes.
Right. And you went back and forth several times. You left, did you have to go get the pocketbook of the identification?
And then her insurance card. And taken out to the administrators.
Okay. So Tex has been sitting there by himself.
Yes.
There had been no huddling with anybody. There had been no discussion of anything at that particular point, correct?
No.
All right. And when you provided the identification, did you have to go all the way back out to the car?
No, I had her purse. I just had to find it.
All right. And you found it?
Yes.
You provided it?
Correct.
And then did you go back and sit with Tex?
I went back in there after I did those two things.
Okay.
I didn't sit down.
You were standing.
Yes.
And when you were standing, is this when you had that conversation?
No.
What else happened after that?
He said, I need my cell phone. It's charging. It's on the charger in the car.
Okay. And then you went out to get, at least you were, sorry, were you escorted out? And
Oh, a girl did show me how to get out.
okay.
Because I didn't know where the entrance was. I didn't know where it was.
Did you then need, get somebody to get the phone for you, or did you get the phone for yourself?
I asked the valet if they could.
That didn't happen either, right?
No.
And you were standing out in the valet area?
Standing, and then I sat down for a while.
Okay, outside.
Yes.
All right. Did you see yourself on the surveillance tape going outside, asking, and sitting outside?
No, I didn't see tapes of that.
Okay. And then did you go back into the waiting room?
Yes, I did.
Right. And maybe I am mistaken about when this conversation occurred, but after all of this conversation, what was the next conversation you had?
I went back in the little waiting area and I handed him his phone. I was still standing in front of him and he started scrolling through his phone.
Okay. Conversation then?
He said, this doesn't look good.
Okay. Do you know whether he was talking about doesn't look good, her physical condition?
No.
You don't know what he was talking about, correct?
No.
And at that particular point, nobody had come in, and the doctor had to come in and said, her heart's strong, we're going to do everything we can for her, right? So you didn't even know what he was referring to at that point, right?
No.
Okay. And did anybody else show up at that point?
Not right away.
How long did you sit there?
Well, we had another conversation. So,
And when did you have another conversation?
right then.
Okay. Now, is that the conversation? Is that the conversation where he
I know
says,
it doesn't look good, and then
Yeah.
he looks past me. I'm still standing up with my back to the door, and there are people walking around, and you know, I could see out of my periphery that those uniform guys were walking around out there, and he looks up and he looked at one of them. I had no idea which one it was, and said, "I don't trust these guys."
Okay.
And
Yep.
I hate to see you get wrapped up in this Danny Joe.
Okay, so let me stop you there. The context here is, I hate to see you get wrapped up in this Danny Joe, right?
Yes.
You're already wrapped up in it, correct?
Correct.
You're already driving the car in, correct?
Yes.
You're already on surveillance, correct?
Yes.
You already have handed the valet the keys, one. You've handed the folks at Emory Diane's information and identification, correct?
Correct.
You have gone back out to the valet to get the phone and come back in, correct?
Correct.
And then I hate to get you involved in this, Danny Joe. Just tell him you're here as a family friend.
Yeah, you just need to tell them you're down here as a friend
Sure.
of the family.
Because the Martians would have come down and driven the car in.
So next question.
Right.
Well, wasn't that just, and you don't need to look at him, you know, wasn't that just the dumbest thing you've ever heard?
It didn't make sense to me.
Of course it didn't make sense. There's no question that Tex McIver was the person who shot his wife. Right?
Yes.
That's what I mean. There was no question about that. Nobody was denying that. It wasn't, correct?
Correct.
It wasn't a mystery, correct?
Correct.
You drove the car in and were on video and were there giving information.
Covered the video and handing people the ID and all that.
Right. It was just stupid, wasn't it?
That's why I leaned down and told him, Tex, I just drove you into the emergency room.
Right. And you know, that was it. And he said, I'm not telling you to lie, right?
No,
He didn't say that?
not right now.
Okay, but he said that afterwards, didn't he?
After I said I can't lie.
Sure, and he said, I'm not telling you to do that. And that was it. That was the end of that.
That wasn't the whole conversation.
Well, maybe I missed it when Mr. Rucker asked you, but we've got at least 3 statements, and we'll get there in a little while. We've got at least 3 statements, one that you gave to Riker and Robeson L when you were driving around, one short one, and we'll get to the timing of these before you gave the statement to Smith, right? And then you gave the statement to Detective Smith, so it's at least 3 statements at that point on the 26th, right?
Yeah, I did not give the police the APD on the way down there statements.
Yeah.
I did when we were there at APD.
Okay.
I talked to him about his work and his job and how long he lived in Atlanta, because the guy in the back seat had said that we were going to interview
Hold on, I
right
didn't
now.
ask you what the guy in the back seat said. I'm asking you about what you said, not the guy in the back seat.
No, I didn't say anything to those officers about the incident.
Okay? At least at that particular point, you had been, well, after the statement at the hospital, the police came in. Riker and Robeson L came to the hospital, correct?
Correct.
They came into the room, the waiting room, correct?
Yes.
They came into the waiting room at the time that Dr. Hardy was in the waiting room, correct?
She came in after him.
How soon after that?
There was enough time for some conversation to start, and she quieted everybody.
Okay. And at that particular point, was Mr. Maples there?
Yes.
You hadn't had any conversation with Mr. Maples, correct?
No.
Mr. Maples hadn't told you what to say or how to say anything, correct?
No.
Okay. And that gathering that you had there wasn't a meeting in which some script was written about what to say, correct?
No.
Okay. Dr. Hardy came in, shushed everybody, and told the room, I guess, about Diane, right?
Yes.
That was where she said, Dr. Hardy said, Diane had said it was an accident, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So we knew at least one thing at that particular point. Diane was alive,
Yeah.
and she was talking, which is better than the condition she was in when she was brought in, correct? Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, I know, it's difficult and it brings back memories, but you made it through this morning. The words that Dr. Hardy spoke were, in that sense, encouraging.
Very.
Okay. And you, along with Tex, were optimistic about the potential outcome. Right?
Yes.
And Dr. Hardy was saying, you know, we're encouraged by this and we're going to do the best we can. Right? To help her.
Yes.
And was it after that that the police came in?
No, they were there.
Okay, the police were there at that point.
They were there.
And it was at that point that you were taken from that location, correct?
Yes.
You were taken outside of that little room, right? And during the car ride, what you understood was, I'm going to show them where this occurred, right, in the route.
Yes, they told me that they had to figure out if we were in Atlanta or.
Right. You were at Emory, which is in DeKalb County,
Yes.
and they wanted, the Atlanta Police Department wanted to see if it was within their jurisdiction,
Yes.
to your understanding, right? But they took you apart from Tex,
Yes.
right? They put you in, was it a marked vehicle or an unmarked vehicle?
No.
No, which?
It was a terrible little car.
A terrible little car. But at least it didn't have a cage in it. You know what a cage is?
Yes.
All right. Did it have a
No,
cage?
it's
Okay.
not.
All right.
And I was sitting in the front seat.
All right. It'll take a second. All right. You were taken and you were driven along a route to try to determine the jurisdiction, right?
Yes.
At that particular point, you didn't know anything about Diane's condition.
No, I was
Other-
not.
Okay, other than what Dr. Hardy had told you, or you had
Yes.
heard from Dr. Hardy.
Yes.
Do we have any idea about what time that may have been?
No.
Do you have any idea about what time or how much time it took you to redo the route with them?
No, I don't. I remember thinking it felt like forever. So I kind of lost track of time at that point.
Well, in the meantime, you told us a little bit about your phone, but perhaps it didn't get voice calls. Could you text?
It would accept texts.
It wouldn't send out texts?
Yeah.
It wouldn't send out texts?
I think it would. I was so annoyed with it that I wanted to throw it.
Okay, so during the period that you were taken away, that you did the drive-through, you just didn't know the status of Diane's condition.
Yes, I did not.
And you knew your phone was messed up.
Yes.
Did you ask either Mr. Riker or Robinson-L to use their phone?
No.
Did you ask them if they had an update on Diane's condition?
I think I may have.
Okay. And did you get any update on her condition? This is before you got back to APD.
Yes.
Wait, before you get back to APD?
No.
Okay, that's I'm going chronologically, okay?
Okay.
You get back to APD, right?
Yes.
And you're there, Tex is not there, to your knowledge, right?
No.
Okay.
He's still at the hospital.
And you are taken to a little interview room,
Yes.
and they tell you that they're going to ask you some questions about what happened, right?
Yes.
Okay. This is 9/26, the early morning of 9/26. Have you had a chance to look at that statement that you gave them at that point? The first one, to Riker and Wilberson-L. Did you have a chance to review that?
I did.
All right. Would you disagree that that statement was given at 1:09 a.m.?
I wouldn't.
Okay. So from the time you left the hospital to the time you got back to APD and were brought into that interview room and the interview started, it was now 1:09. Okay? Any reason to disagree with me?
No.
All right. This is after the time that you had the conversation with Mr. McIver at the hospital, right?
Yes.
And at this particular point, you had gotten no news about Diane's condition.
I know.
The last news that you got was encouraging news, correct?
Yes.
And when you were asked questions about what happened, you were trying to give them as much information as possible.
Yes.
Okay, I mean, you know, you had the opportunity to answer the questions however you wanted, correct?
I was trying to be cooperative.
You had the opportunity to answer the questions however you wanted and as fully as you wanted to, correct?
Yes.
No, I mean, nobody told you, don't tell us these answers, don't tell us everything, you know, don't fully answer the questions.
No.
Okay. When you were talking to them 9/26 at 1:09 a.m., they had asked you to tell them what happened, right?
Yes.
And they also told you, look, if we get a text, we're going to have to leave and, you know, we may have to come back, right?
Yes.
All right. One of the things that you told them at this first interview, do you remember? That you asked Diane again, that you told them that you asked Diane if she wanted to get off at that first exit, correct?
Yes.
And you also told them that Tex was sleeping in the back.
And I knew that because Diana had to wake him up.
Okay. He had dozed off. That's what you told him.
Well, I didn't, I wouldn't have known that unless she said, Tex, wake up.
That's what you told him. You told him.
I knew he was asleep because
Okay.
she woke him up.
And one of the reasons you knew he was asleep and you were explaining to them was that Tex had been out on the golf course all day. That it was hot out there, and you know he was an old guy and he was falling asleep.
I did not say he was an old guy.
I know. I'm saying that, right? And they asked you whether he was drunk, and you said no.
Correct.
You reiterated again that he was sleeping, and Diane kept pushing at him to wake up,
Correct.
right?
That's how I knew he was sleeping.
Okay. Well, you also told him that you knew he was sleeping after you got off, because you told him that Tex just went back to sleep because he was quiet, and Diane and I were talking about the Claremont Lounge
Yeah.
and politics and stuff, and we were stopped at whichever intersection that was, right?
We didn't stop at Constellation.
No. Said, and we were stopped at whatever intersection that was
Okay.
after the conversation,
Okay.
because you were talking about politics. I guess that's my point. And Diane sat up and said, Tex, what did you do? And you responded, I'm trying to remember exactly what he said, that the gun went off, he was asleep, and he woke up. That's what you told him
Yes.
that morning at 1:09. And indeed, that you didn't know that she had been shot, right? Okay. It was all very quick, right?
Yes.
And then you thought she was joking.
So I'm curious, some of this is consistent with what she said,
Yes.
and I don't feel like maybe you are being as precise as you ought to be if you're going to be marching to a statement. Because if it's consistent, I'm not quite sure what your basis is. If it's inconsistent, have at it. But
Okay.
a lot of this is consistent with what she told the state and you, and the state and you, and the state and you.
Sure. One of the things they asked about what happened, and you gave a recitation, and that recitation lasted 10 minutes, 10 full minutes of you telling them what occurred.
This is the first two officers?
Yes. Correct?
That sounds right.
All right. You didn't anywhere tell them that Tex had this conversation with you, this stupid conversation. You didn't tell them that, though, right?
Yes, you're correct.
Okay. You also told them, in response to their question, tell us about their relationship. Tell me about their relationship. And you said, it's as close to perfect as you can get. Those are your words.
I believe that.
I mean, she loved her work and made a ton of money. He likes what he does. I think he could probably retire easier than she could because she really loves her work,
I remember saying that.
right? And they're both very successful and extremely happy.
Yes.
You were specifically asked before the police walked up, what kind of conversation did you guys have? Remember that?
No?
No, I don't, I'm sorry.
Okay, she
I
doesn't
remember
remember.
what police?
Can I ask you?
I lost my bearing and my, where we're
This is
at.
the first statement to Riker and Bogus, and now I'm going to ask you to read it and refresh your recollection.
I'm asking the court perhaps if we just maybe take a 5-minute
Sure, why don't we get through this statement? And, okay, if we get through this statement? Yes, okay, we'll get through this statement and then we'll give everyone a chance to revote.
break. Okay.
All right, so Ms. Carter's reviewing what page of the Robeson L transcript?
3.
3.
Well,
Oh, sorry.
that's my little scribble 3.
Okay.
Oh,
Unnumbered page 3.
Yes.
Counsel, before you ask her a question, can I take a look at
Yes,
right to the
you can.
Thank you.
Did you have an opportunity to review that?
yes, my brain's kind of mush right now. So-
We're going to take a break in just a minute. We'll just get through this part.
Does that refresh your recollection as to the question you were asked?
Yes,
Okay. And the question was, before the police walked up, what was the conversation that you had, correct?
with Tex,
Yeah, right.
yes.
And you didn't tell them about the conversation you told us, the stupid conversation, right?
No, I thought it sounded bad.
All right, we're going to take a break. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll try to get you back here in about 10 minutes. If that's not enough time, just let Deputy Murphy know and we'll make it a little bit longer. Pretty confident we won't talk about the case while you're back there, but just in case you're tempted to, don't talk about the case while you're back there. And we'll reconvene shortly.
All rise for the jurors. Please be seated.
Anything from the state before we break?
No, sir.
Okay, Mr. Harvey, anything?
No, sir.
All right, Ms. Carter, enjoy your break. We'll get you back here in about 10 minutes.
Judges on the bench, let's be seated.
Can you guys get Ms. Carter back in here, please? I'm sure she's waiting right there, ready to come back. Hello, Ms. Moon.
Hey, how are you?
I'm well.
I was trying to figure out what I had to do last week was the Sally Bank Thanksgiving.
That's right.
Pleasure of. It's good to see a different road, I guess.
Yeah, I was going to say, that was in a different role.
Freeman
Right.
is a free man.
A free man.
He's also a deceased man.
He's a motorcycle riding Apache.
I think less than a year after his release.
What a blast.
How you doing?
Blast.
I'm not quite sure if I'm unwished or not, but
Well, as unwished as you're going to get.
do you have motorcycles? Okay. I just heard y'all talking about it.
Long before I had kids, I did. But
That guy was talking to my husband and having kids. I guess I really have motorcycles.
if they are, we're good.
All rise for the jurors. All jurors are present and accounted for, Your Honor.
Thank you, Deputy Murphy. You all can be seated. Everyone doing all right? Me too. All right. Mr. Harvey, you were in the midst of your cross-examination of Ms. Carter. She's back, and so are you.
I think we had finished, Ms. Carter, with your 109 interview at Atlanta Police Department. That interview ended. No, I'm going to wait because we don't have the report.
Whoops. Hey, how are you? It was about 5 minutes ago, but it's all good. Don't worry. We had just made sure everyone was in position. So let me know when you're ready.
Okay, second. I'm ready.
Okay. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Harvey is now about to recommence his cross-examination of Ms. Carter.
Take two. We had, I'm gonna repeat, all right?
This one's okay.
All right. We had just finished talking about your interview at 1:09 a.m. On the morning of the 26th, okay? That was when you had first come back to APD. You were brought into an interview room and you talked with them for about 10 minutes, correct?
Yes.
Someone either got a text or a call, and the two gentlemen that you were talking to left the room.
Yes.
Okay. And that would have been, would you disagree with me, that it was approximately about literally 10 minutes after the interview started?
I would not disagree.
Okay. And then you told us that there was a lengthy time that you were left there by yourself.
Yes.
Okay. And you know, you were informed that Diane had passed, right?
Yes.
And here you are, her best friend, in an interview at the Atlanta Police Department, left by yourself, correct?
Yes.
And it was clearly an emotional time for you, right? Right, especially being left alone there.
Yeah, I'm scared down there. I mean, because it was an empty building, a big empty building.
And really, from about 20 after 1 till, and again, would you disagree with me that your second interview started at 2:39?
I certainly, I wouldn't disagree. I don't have any idea because I had been crying and I wasn't sure why I was still alone. And I didn't know he was going to, I didn't know why I was still alone. And I didn't like one of the policemen that was trying to interview me. So I didn't want to talk to him again.
Okay, I'm sorry. That was a multifaceted answer.
Okay.
And
Last part kind of trailed off.
yeah.
She didn't like one of the police officers who had been interviewing her, and she didn't want to talk with him anymore.
Okay. And you didn't have to, correct?
That's correct.
Because
I
they,
didn't know.
right, they
Yes.
left.
Yes.
And I'm just trying to get this gap period because I know it was difficult for you. You're sitting in an unfamiliar place and essentially in police custody. You can't really go anywhere. You can't really do anything. And you just got some of the worst news you've ever got.
Yes.
And really, an hour and 30 minutes later was when another officer came in, correct?
Yes.
And you've come to know that officer by his name, Detective Darren Smith, correct?
Yes.
And I guess I was at the point of saying that, would you disagree with me that that interview started at 2:39?
I would not disagree.
Okay. And that was a rather lengthy interview, correct?
Yes.
And would you again disagree with me that it was approximately 53 minutes? So it was almost an hour of time that you spent at 2:39 in the morning talking with Detective Smith, correct?
And it seemed like more, but yes.
Right. But Detective Smith came in and he told you that he was now taking over the investigation, correct?
Yes.
And that he had, now that he was in the game, he wanted to, and I don't mean that facetiously, that's just a term, I don't view this as a game, that he wanted to get a full statement from you, right?
Yes.
And I know that you collected yourself, and that when he was asking you questions, you did your best to answer his questions as best as you could, correct?
Yes.
And you wanted to give him as accurate a picture of what occurred as you could, correct?
Yes.
And he asked you about the events and what you did during the day, and I'm not going to go through all of that again because I'm getting the eye from the judge.
I'm just looking at my work screen here.
Yeah, the record according will reflect. So I'm not going to take you back through all of that, but Detective Smith did, right?
Yes.
And you gave him those answers as thoroughly and fully as you could, correct?
Yes.
At the time,
At the time.
right? Well, of course. There is one of the things that Detective Smith asked you about was whether it was accidental, whether it was an accident or intentional. Didn't he?
Yes, he did.
And you answered him, there is not a doubt in my mind that it was completely one of the most horrible accidents that I know about.
I did.
You told Detective Smith in that interview that Tex seemed to be in shock, in feeling like horrible. You remember?
Yes.
And this is the time where you told them that he felt like, he said he felt like shit. I don't know what to say to him. He absolutely worships her.
Yes.
Once again, secondly, you expressed to Detective Smith the second time that it was a horrible accident. How many did you say it once? You said it more than once. Correct.
Yes.
Do you remember during that second interview whether Detective Smith had asked you about conversations that you had with Tex,
I do.
and that you replied, he did, he said that he hated for me, to be drug into this mess. Remember that?
Yes, I do.
But you didn't say anything, you didn't tell him anything after that.
No, I didn't.
So you didn't tell him anything in the first statement. You didn't tell him anything when specifically asked about those conversations. In the second one, in the second statement,
In the first statement, we didn't get to that point.
I think, I'm not going to go back. remember Detective Smith saying to you that police officers in the Atlanta Police Department have accidental discharge of weapons all the time?
I don't remember that.
Would you read the highlighted portions, please, and I'll ask you if that refreshes your recollection.
Yes,
Okay,
I see it.
statement. Second.
No. 26. Does that refresh your recollection?
It does.
So, you're about to ask her what the detective said? Is that your question?
Already did.
Okay, well, I object. Okay? Before the answer comes out.
It already came out.
Well, the answer was she didn't remember, now she's read this, but I'll ask you to move to a different area.
With regard to the answers that you gave Detective Smith that day, do you remember telling Detective Smith that in answering his questions, you were as clear as you could possibly be?
I don't remember saying that. Are you going to show it to me?
You're learning how this works.
It might have been one of the even odd pages.
Does that refresh your recollection?
Yes.
Because you were trying to be as clear as possible, right?
I was.
Detective Smith was attempting to talk to you and get anything else about any other conversations that may have occurred at the hospital.
Yes.
He was trying to get you to tell him about any conversations that you may have had with anybody at the hospital, correct?
Yes.
And the purpose of his asking you those questions was just to make sure that if anybody at the hospital said something different, he wouldn't have to come back and talk to you again. Trying to get everything out, correct?
Yes.
And in fact, you were asked, so anything else you can remember that you think might be important, right?
Yes.
And do you remember your answer was, not now?
Not now.
Okay. And indeed, during that second 53-minute interview, you didn't mention the conversation that you had with Mr. McIver, correct?
I did not.
That stupid conversation that
It
you
was a
talked.
bad conversation. It sounded very bad at the text.
Well, here was my question. I'm sorry. Maybe you didn't understand my question. My question was, you didn't tell Detective Smith, who was trying his best to get you to tell him everything you didn't tell him when he asked you. Is there anything else that's important,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, as I understand it, after that conversation, you attempted to, I guess, get a hold of somebody like your husband, correct? Did you text him? Did you call him?
I got in touch with him before that. One of the detectives that was there, they would come in and out from somewhere and check on me occasionally and bring me a bottle of water or ask me if I needed to go to the restroom. And I borrowed one of their cell phones to call Tom.
Okay, Tom being your husband that you showed us a picture of, correct? You hadn't talked with him that entire evening.
No.
He had been away in Oxford.
Yes.
He was coming back, to your knowledge, on Sunday.
Yes.
And y'all didn't talk because there was no communication. Your phone wasn't working very well. You were in a situation where you were with the police, correct? And sometimes you guys stay over Sunday night.
He knew we were coming back. I had sent him a text that we were, all I could bring myself to do is say that we were at the hospital. I couldn't give him any more information because I couldn't, it's like you can't write certain things down. I couldn't put it in words.
So it's your recollection that you sent him a text
Saying that we were
at the hospital. After you finished the interview with Detective Smith, were arrangements made for Tom, do you know, to come get you?
Yes.
And do you mind if I call him Tom? I would assume he would know. And to the best of your recollection, do you remember that Tom came to pick you up at APD?
Yes, he did.
He came in your car, correct?
Yes.
So your car was at the condo.
Yes.
So however it needed to be arranged, he had to go to the condo, get the car, come downtown, pick you up, correct?
Yes, his truck was being repaired, and so he rode down there on a motorcycle.
And to the best of your recollection, he picked you up 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning.
That sounds right.
You then went back to Emory.
Yes.
And at Emory, the Tex was being seen by the Emory staff, correct?
Somebody, yes.
Yeah, somebody, you didn't know, but he was being seen and he wasn't available.
Correct.
Tom and you waited for him.
Yes.
Was it just Tom and you, or was it someone else?
No, Steve Maples was there.
So Steve Maples was still there at 5 or 6 in the morning.
Yes.
You knew that Steve Maples was a friend of Texas, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And how long did you wait there?
It may have been an hour by the time we got there and between us getting back to the hospital and leaving.
Sorry?
It may have been an hour before, when Tom and I got back to the hospital, waited for Tex, and then left.
Okay. Tom came to pick you up, you sat there. Tex, you, and Tom left together,
Yes.
right? Maples left and went somewhere else unknown.
He left, he said he had a court case in the morning.
Okay. It was already morning.
Yes,
Yeah, everybody had been up pretty much all night.
yes.
And did you know whether at that particular point, Tex had been given any medication?
A nurse told me that they didn't add that.
Right. So I guess the answer would be yes, you understood that he had been given some medication at that point.
Yes,
And your plan was to go back to the condo with Tex, correct?
he had asked me to.
Okay, and so your plan was to go back
Yes.
to the condo with Tex, correct? And so Tom dropped you and Tex off at the condo.
Yes,
And y'all went upstairs to the condo, right?
yes,
Was anybody there at that particular time?
no.
And did Tex go to bed? Did he go to sleep? Did he get on the phone?
He got on the phone and started making phone calls.
All right. One of the things that I guess he was trying to do was advise people that something had happened to the night.
Yes,
Do you know whether he actually went to sleep? Now, this is the morning of the 27th, isn't it?
yes.
All right.
No, he did not go to sleep.
I'm sorry?
He did not go to sleep.
How about you?
No, he did not go to sleep.
All right. And when did people start coming over to the condo?
I don't know what time Phyllis usually gets there. She's the housekeeper. It probably around sometime between 7 and 7:30. And Annie, I don't know when she got there.
Okay.
I don't know when Annie got there.
Okay. But you were there, you hadn't gone to sleep, Tex hadn't gone to sleep, the housekeeper came, and her name, you've identified her for us. I'm sorry, is
Phyllis,
Phyllis? Okay. So now we've got at least 4 or 5 people there. Tex has still not gone to bed.
no,
It is Monday day, right?
yes,
Do more people start filtering in?
yes.
And do you remember who else starts filtering in?
No, I really don't remember. I was in such a fog and I was still hadn't taken a shower, I hadn't eaten. I don't really remember who came in first. But all of a sudden there was, there was like 25, 30 people in there.
Lots of people started showing up.
Yes,
I mean, Diane had a circle that knew her and respected her and loved her, correct?
yes,
And a lot of those people started showing up at the condo, correct?
yes.
Now, you told us you hadn't showered, you hadn't done anything, you hadn't eaten. What did you do? Did you go over to Janie's?
Not then. She hadn't gotten home until 5:30.
5:30 that Monday night.
I think it's around 5:30 because that's, I don't know, that popped out of my head.
Okay. Did you continue to hang out at Tex and Diane's condominium during the day on Monday the 26th?
Yes, because a lot of the people that were there that were friends of hers were friends of mine also, and I was there.
Did Tex continue to greet and talk with people?
Yes.
And mingle, so he hadn't gone to bed either.
No,
Your best recollection is that Janie got back around 5:30, right?
yes,
Did you go over to Janie's house
I did.
after that 5:30?
Yes,
All right. Tex, to your knowledge, was still awake, right?
yes.
I mean, when you left, he was awake.
I was so glad to get out of there. I didn't know where he was when I left.
All right. So you don't know where he was when you left?
No,
Okay. But to your knowledge, and what you can tell us today. You don't know whether you'd ever gone to sleep or not that night.
No.
The next time that you saw Tex, I guess, was the next day.
Yes.
The next day is the 27th, correct?
Yes.
And on the 27th, there was a phone call, there was a conversation. Was this the day of the conversation at Janie's? Or was this the day that you and Tex, that you heard Tex on the phone?
If you don't understand his question,
Just because I don't.
I don't know what day or what conversation.
All right, well, I understood that there was a conversation when Billy Corey had come over and y'all were sitting in a particular location, correct?
Oh, that was at Jamie's on Tuesday.
Okay, on Tuesday.
Yes.
And is that the first conversation that you told us about as opposed to the conversation on the phone when he took the phone from you? You understand what
Yes.
I'm saying? There are two different
Yes.
conversations.
Yeah, I spoke
Right.
to Billy on the phone Monday morning. I spoke to him
Okay, no, go ahead.
later on Monday evening when he told me he wasn't going to come. And then I saw him on Tuesday morning.
Okay. There was a phone conversation that you indicated, and I think it was at Janie's, that the phone, or was it at Texas, where the phone rang and you saw the number that it was Billy.
And spoke to Billy. That was probably sometime really, that was before Phyllis got there on Monday morning. It was early Monday morning.
Okay. So the only two people in the condominium at that time were you and Tex. And is that the conversation where he is on the phone, Tex is on the phone, and he says, there's been an accident, Diane is dead.
Yes.
Well, we know Diane is dead, correct?
Yes.
You had already given a statement to the police, at least two statements to the police, potentially three, but at least two, correct? Right?
Yes.
You had told them it was an accident, correct? You'd already told them that.
Yes.
You told them that at least twice, correct?
Yes.
So when Tex was talking to Billy Corey on the phone, and he said, there's been an accident, Diane is dead, that's exactly what you'd already told the police at the time, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And all right. There was another conversation that you had with, I guess, Billy Corey present? Was that the next day?
That was
at
on
Janie's?
Tuesday morning.
Okay, Tuesday morning. And y'all were there talking, you all, Tex wasn't there.
Not right away, no, not at the time.
That's what I mean. You were there, it was who? Billy?
Tex.
No, first.
Billy, Jay Grover, and Jamie.
Okay. And you three were talking, right?
Yes.
All right. And Tex comes in, correct?
He did come in.
And Tex offered another conversation, another a statement that you told us about, correct? At that point, what did Tex say?
I don't remember what Tex said. I just remember something that Jay Grover told me.
I don't want to know what Jay Grover told you. There was then another conversation with Tex when Tex wanted you to tell him
Oh, that was later on.
that
That was
Tuesday.
later. That was later on. He asked me. I went back over into
Right?
he and Diane's
Okay.
condo.
So there was you heard him say something to Billy Corey on Monday morning. You don't remember any conversation with Tex and Billy Corey. Tuesday morning, there was another conversation when Tex said, come on over, I want to talk to you.
Yes,
And you guys sat there, right?
yes.
And he said, will you tell me what you remember about it? Right?
Yes.
And he didn't tell you, well, here's what I want you to say, did he?
No,
He said, tell me what you remember, correct?
correct.
And by that time, once again, you had already given statements to the police, right?
Yes.
And Tex was trying to take some notes about what you said, right? He was taking some notes.
Yes, he was writing down what I was saying.
Okay. And you were responding to him, right? Right? You
I
were
don't know what you
telling
mean by
him.
responding. Oh, I was telling him. Yeah,
Right.
I talked to him for 2 paragraphs.
Okay, but you didn't tell him anything differently than you told the police, correct?
I didn't get that far. I stopped.
Okay, but in what you said, you didn't tell him anything that you hadn't already told the police, correct?
For 2 paragraphs? No, I did not.
Right. And then after 2 paragraphs, he didn't say, well, here's what I want you to say, right? You had already talked to the police and told them everything that you knew at that particular time, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
And there were 2 paragraphs, and he left the 2 paragraphs there, and you took the 2 paragraphs, right?
I leaned forward because I was uncomfortable with that, and I said, Tex, those are my words,
Okay.
my thoughts, my memories, not yours. You need your memories. And I
Sure.
left. I didn't take the paper right then.
I understand.
Okay.
Those are my memories, you need to have your memories. But there was no conversation, as to what the memories were, how you were going to say it, what to say, who you were going to say it to, and don't talk to the cops or anything like that, right?
No, no.
Okay, right. Not then, correct? And he went on about his business at that particular time. You saw the sheet and picked up the sheet with his notes on them, the 2 paragraphs, correct?
Yeah, a little bit. About an hour later.
Okay, about an hour later. Sometime later you got that, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and here's also what I understand was happening. Steve Maples, his lawyer, Texas lawyer, was trying to get you to give a statement to the press, correct?
Yes.
All right. And they wanted you, Steve at least wanted you to come over to his place and first give what you've described as a deposition, but essentially a statement under oath.
Under oath, yeah.
Okay.
That somebody
Was recorded. Okay. First place, when we say they or we say Steve, who told you to come over there?
Text.
Okay. And did he say, we want you to give a statement?
Yes.
Did he say, here it is, here's what I want you to say?
No.
Okay. So what Steve Maples and Tex McIver wanted you to do was come over, give a sworn statement, and tell them whatever it was you were going to tell them. They didn't tell you to lie. They wanted you to tell the truth. Right?
I suppose so.
Okay. Well, did Steve Maples ever say to you, I want you to come over here, raise your right hand and tell a lie?
No.
Did Tex McIver ever say, I want you to give a statement and which you don't tell them everything? Did he ever say that to you?
No.
So you didn't want to do that.
No, I'd already given my statement to the police, and then there was no other reason for me to make another statement. So
Absolutely.
somebody could compare it to the other one.
And you didn't have to. And
I
nobody
did not
could.
have to. No.
Exactly. And nobody could have forced you.
No.
And you didn't want to, and you felt uncomfortable doing that, right?
Yeah.
And at that particular point, this matter, this case, this incident, had kind of blown up in the press because you told us they're camping out in front of you, they're calling you, they're acting like clients at your place,
Yes.
right? And what you wanted to do was avoid that, and I'm going to
Taking anything that I said out of context and making it sound like something else.
Sure. You'd already given recorded statements to the police.
That's the only person that needed it.
And you exercised your right to not give the statement. And you went to try to avoid it and not show up or do whatever it is, you went to Dale Cardwell's house, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you never gave that statement, correct?
No.
Okay. But the one thing that nobody ever said is, get out there and tell a lie.
You've really covered that.
Really. I'm also remembering a conversation. Your text was on the phone, and you said he looked at you and said, listen to this.
Listen to what I'm saying. I want you to listen to what I'm saying.
Tell us when that was.
That was first thing Monday morning. I don't know who he was about to call, but he was making a phone call to somebody.
Okay, listen to what I'm saying.
Yes.
This would have been, again, after you'd already given a statement.
Yes.
Okay. And after you told the police what you told them, correct?
Yes.
And what you heard Tex say was, it was an accident, Diane's dead.
Yes.
Again, nothing different than what you already told the police, correct?
Correct.
I think you talked with Mr. Rucker a little bit about Diane's cremains.
Yes.
Diane had been cremated,
Yes.
to your knowledge, and she had been cremated at a certain location, correct? At a particular funeral home.
In Conyers,
In
yes.
Conyers. Did you know whether or not he was trying to get a suitable urn designed for Diane?
There was something said about that.
Okay. And do you know whether or not he had ordered 10 small urns?
That's what I was told.
Okay. 10 small urns to give to 10 folks to remember Diane. Is that what you understood?
Yes.
Okay. And that, did you also understand that they only had 5 and they had to order another 5?
No.
And that Tex was trying to wait till all 10 of those urns were present before he went to pick them up. Did Did you know that?
No.
Did you know in the meantime, before you went to pick up those urns, some other person came in and paid for the parades?
No, I did not know that.
Did you know that that was unbeknownst to Tex?
No. I
And
didn't
that
know anything about it.
he sent a check.
Jesse, you know anything about it?
Okay.
Judge?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
And did you know that he sent a check, not knowing that that somebody else had already paid?
No. So when did all 10 urns get?
You don't get to ask. It's only what you say that's evidence, not questions that are asked. You don't get to ask back because what you're saying is evidence.
That's the next one, Judge, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Judge already thinks he testified.
I'm just curious, because
It's okay.
Sorry.
We're gonna have Mr. Harvey ask other questions.
And Mr. Harvey is going to ask other questions. So several nights at the condo, staying with Jamie Calhoun, we're talking about this first week, correct?
yes,
And those are generally the conversations, those are the conversations that you told us about on direct examination, correct? I've covered each one of those conversations, have I not?
with me and Jamie, or me and Tex, or?
You and
Billy?
Tex. You and Tex.
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
thank you. You were staying with Jamie,
yes,
and this was indeed, understandably, a rough time, correct?
very,
So unfortunately, you started drinking again.
yes.
And was there any tension between you and Jamie about you drinking?
Well, we had a glass of wine together initially, and then I had another drink one night. She'd gone to sleep.
Did she ask you to leave?
No.
I want
Okay, I'm sorry.
Finish.
Yeah, no, you keep answering, and then Mr. Harvey will ask his next question.
Sure.
No, she did not ask me to leave.
Okay. The next time you had any interaction, I guess after you left, you told us, I think it was that Friday, right?
Yes,
After you left, the next interaction you had with Tex was at Austin's flag football game.
2 weeks later.
2 weeks after that, or 2 weeks after?
2 weeks after Diane died.
Right, so that would be a week after you left on Friday approximately.
Correct.
Okay. A week later, it was at the flag football game. And you went to the flag football game and you were going to confront Tex about certain things, correct?
I had some questions that I wanted to ask him.
And I think one of the questions that you had dealt with what he was going to do about taking care of Austin.
No,
It was, boy, I don't think that Diane would be happy about what?
with the way the will was, like the 2000 will,
Okay, well,
2006 will. was laid
had you
out.
seen the 2006 will at that time?
No, I'm not.
When you asked that question, did you get information from somebody else about the contents of that will?
Several people had told me that who was in the will, what they were, what it was, what was left to whom, and
So,
yeah, 2006 Austin wasn't born.
I get it. But somebody else had told you about the will.
Yeah, well, I think it was in the news and in the paper.
You hadn't seen it.
No, I knew that that was the one that they got out because Ken Rigger told me the day that they got into the file cabinet.
You hadn't seen it
I hadn't
yet.
seen it, no.
You were relying on what other people told you about it, correct?
Yeah, other people that,
Is that, yeah, you can say yes or no.
yes.
And when a discussion ensued about the will, did I understand that Tex, this will, Tex said that he was revising his will?
He told me in a phone call later that he was revising his will and that he had left everything to Austin and nothing to his children.
And when he was revising his will and when he had this conversation with you, he, Tex, invited you, Danny Joe, to come with him.
Yes, ma'am.
And come with him and come to the lawyer's office when he was revising his will, correct?
Yes.
To make sure that you knew or that you saw that he was in fact revising his will.
Well, I object to speculation.
That's exactly what he told me.
Well, why don't you ask, did he tell you? As opposed to, you knew. Her impressions were not so interested in, were more interested in other things.
Did he invite you to come over there and go with him to that will change?
I think that's been asked and answered.
Well,
Yes, he did.
okay. Did you go?
No, I did not.
Did you know that he changed his will in October of 2016?
No. Do you recall telling the state that prior to the 2016, September 2016 incident, that you knew that Tex had a sleep disorder? Yes.
And you knew that he had a sleep disorder where when he woke up, he couldn't distinguish between his dreams and reality.
That's what he told me.
Yes. And you know that he had this sleep disorder in September of 2016, correct? Correct?
Yes. Yes.
And that when he awoke,
You guess.
I don't know anything. I'm not a sleep disorder. I don't know. Once you have it, they go away.
you understood that when he woke up or when he was asleep, he would lash out, correct?
That was,
And in fact,
Did you finish your answer?
I'm sorry.
Right, you keep answering, he doesn't get to cut you off.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I apologize. He would lash out,
yes.
and you understood that Diane was afraid he was going to hit her.
Yes.
The the other descriptions that you had given the authorities on 9/26 of 2016. Was that Tex absolutely worshipped Diane.
Well, I want to check before she answers. I think this question has been asked and answered as well. You're plowing to low ground.
Great. That they were lovebirds. You use those words, correct?
Refresh my recollection, you're referring to what interview now?
9/26, the second one with Detective Smith.
Okay. I think we've,
Not all of them. Not everything that she said. I'm going back.
okay, but how is this in any way inconsistent with anything else that she said? That you've quoted her saying in any of the interviews about the perfect relationship, lovebirds, etc.
No. I quoted some of it.
Yes?
I'm not asking her whether it's inconsistent. I'm asking her how she described their relationship, and that's where I'm going to finish.
Okay.
I think the question I had was, you described them as lovebirds, correct?
Yes,
And that it was a relationship to be envied, correct?
correct,
And they were always talking about how happy she is, correct?
yes,
And that they were still attracted to each other, correct?
yes,
And you described like, sometimes you thought they were just going to hop in the back seat of the car, right?
yes,
And that is exactly what was the relationship that you observed between Tex and Diane on 9/25/2016, correct?
yes.
One moment, please, Judge.
Pardon?
I said, one moment, please.
Sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. Rucker? Any reason?
Okay. Let's see. I'm sorry. Yeah. I think I'm going to start with some of your conversations with Mr. Harvey about video that he showed you with the vehicle traveling down Piedmont, okay?
Okay.
You remember when you talked to him about that?
Yes.
Okay. And I think when he showed you the video, it was, do you remember what direction the truck, the SUV was traveling? Did you see it from the front or from the rear?
From the back.
From the back. Now, when he showed you that video and asked you if that was the truck, did you say that just because that was the only one he showed you, or did you say that because you really thought that was the truck?
Is that a direct question?
Yes. It gives multiple options.
Well, I just assumed since I was looking at that one, that was it. I couldn't really tell.
Right, you couldn't really tell, right?
Yeah,
Okay. So it's possible that that really wasn't in your truck at all, right?
It's possible.
Okay, so let me show you State's Exhibit number 233. Let's stop it where Mr. Harvey showed it.
We've already gone past
We're
it.
gonna pass it. That's what I'm. Okay. You recall seeing that?
Just a moment ago,
Right. When Mr. Harvey was asking some questions,
yes,
and you recognized that to be P minus 12, right?
yes.
Okay. Now, can you tell the jurors what did you, when you came to the red light, what happened?
The 12th Street red light or the 14th Street?
Wherever you believe the shot was fired.
Oh, we were stopped at a red light, at whichever one it was.
Right. Is there a red light right there? Can you tell?
Is that a traffic light?
So again, you don't get to ask questions,
Oh.
but you can, if you think there's a traffic light there.
It looks like a traffic light.
Okay. And what color is it right there?
It's green,
Okay, and the truck is already going through the intersection?
correct.
Okay, so go a little bit past that. Okay. What color is that light? Can you tell?
It looks as though it's turned red.
Okay. And the truck is already gone, right?
Yes,
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, at the time that the shot went off, was there a car in front of you?
there was a car in front of me.
Do you see a car in front of you in that video?
No,
Was there a car next to you?
there was a car next to me.
On your left side?
On the left side.
Do you see a car on your left side of that video?
No,
Okay. How about on your right side? Was there a car on your right side?
I don't think so.
Okay. But we don't even see a car on the right side in that video, right?
No.
Okay. And I think Mr. Harvey asked you about the time that's shown in that video. What time is shown in that video?
I now know that it was 10 o'clock.
Right. That was your discussion with him, right?
Yes.
Okay. So on this video, just for our conversation, I'll call it the Harvey video, okay? The time is 10 o'clock, right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, I want to show you an exhibit that's been introduced into evidence already. This is State's Exhibit number 231. Have you ever seen this before?
No.
No. So this is what I want to ask you. Is it possible that this vehicle right here,
Huh?
right here, that could be the vehicle that you're traveling in?
It's possible.
Okay. And in that video, is there a car in front of you?
Yes.
And is there a car next to you?
Yes.
And is that consistent with what you testified to the jurors before about what happened when you were stopped at the red light when the shot went off?
The form of that question is
Yes.
inconsistent.
Stop, don't answer the question. So she doesn't get to assess what's consistent or not.
I understand.
You can argue.
So I can ask for caution.
Okay, don't ask your questions like that anymore.
I won't.
Okay.
What time is on that video?
I guess it's, well, it says 22:05,
Okay.
so would that be 5 after 10?
Very good. Very good. We'll call this one the Rucker video. PM. Do you know what time? Did you get a chance to see the video surveillance at the valet at the hospital?
Yes.
You did?
Yeah.
Do you recall the timestamp on the video there? You don't? Okay. I want to show you State's Exhibit number 230. Actually, I'd like to show you the video first. So if you would help me first by showing the video where the SUV is coming through the 10th Street intersection, okay, approaching.
We're looking at it at the other direction, correct?
Correct. You are approaching 10th Street on Piedmont. Are you oriented in your mind?
Yeah, it's just the opposite way of what.
That's correct. That's correct. 2204. You can fast forward it just to 2204. Okay, stop it right there. It's not stopping. Let me back it up just a little bit. Okay, stop right there. You recognize that
No, I
vehicle?
was looking at that one.
And this vehicle right here?
This one?
Yes.
So once you touch the screen, remember it'll make a mark.
Okay.
Okay.
Uh-huh. Possible that's the SUV?
It's possible. They all look alike.
You all kind of look alike. I know. It's been a long day too, hasn't it? But the SUV in that video, do you see it have to make a hard brake because there's a car who backs out in front of it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, right here.
Do you remember that occurring on that night?
I do not.
You do not. Okay. And can we speed it forward? What time we'll see on the timestamp? Does that vehicle go past the camera? And if we can stop it, what time is that?
10:04.
I know this might sound like a silly question, but I'm going to ask you this. Do you have any idea why the time when you go through 12th Street is just 1 minute past the time when we go through 10th Street? Do you know?
No.
Okay. Do you know anything about how the cameras are synced for Midtown Blue? Do you know?
No.
Okay. Go back just a bit. Do you recall what kind of tag was on the front of the SUV? You remember?
No. It could have been orange longhorns.
Orange Longhorns,
Yeah.
like Texas Longhorns?
Yeah. Could have been.
No. Let me show you a photo. This is already in. This is stage 232. It's a still from the video that we just looked at. What color was the shirt that you had on that night?
White,
White?
with a white linen tunic.
Can you make out what's on that tag right there, that still photo?
I can't.
You can't, all right. Let me show you State's Exhibit 129. Recognize that?
Yeah.
What is it?
It's an orange longhorn,
On the front of what?
the board expedition.
The one that you were driving that night?
Yes.
Does that photo fairly and accurately show the way the front of the expedition looked the night you were driving?
Yes.
Okay. I would admit States 129.
Admit.
That's the way it looks. Right?
Yes.
But on this photo, you just can't make it out real well.
Yeah, it's hard to determine.
Okay. I want to ask you about an answer to a question that Mr. Harvey asked with respect to your conversations with the defendant at the flag football game when you talked about revising his will. You remember that? You talked to Mr. Harvey about that?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell the jurors how did that conversation come up, and what did you say, and what did the defendant say about revising his will?
Well, we were talking about that Diane wouldn't be happy with the way, with what I understood with the 2006 will, being laid out because Austin wasn't in it and there was someone in it that she hadn't spoken to for years.
Let me object to that. It's an answer that's beyond the defendant. Because
That's beyond what?
the understanding of this witness, again, is hearsay. So I'm going to object to that.
Okay, I think she's repeated an answer you elicited, so I'll allow it in for now. But we ought not to, the hearsay flag has been raised. So if we get beyond what she was talking about on cross, then
I'm staying right within those boundaries. Okay. I'm asking what you said to him. That's what you said to him.
I said she wouldn't be happy.
Okay. Did you tell him why she wouldn't be happy?
Yes.
And what did you tell him about why she wouldn't be happy?
well, she just said that.
Okay. I wanted to make sure that it was clear.
Okay.
And when you said that to him, what did he say back to you?
That they were working on revising their wills, but he had to cancel the appointments.
And who had been working on revising their will?
Both of them.
Okay. And what did he tell you about revising his own will?
Later on in a phone conversation, not that day.
Okay. So the conversation you had with him 2 weeks after Diane's death at the flag football game, he never mentioned anything to you about revising his will to leave the ranch to Austin, did he?
No.
It was sometime later, right?
Yes.
And what exactly did he tell you?
That he had revised his will to be what he thought Diane wanted, and that he had left the branch to Austin, and that he had left nothing to his children.
Mr. McIver had children,
Yes.
and we already know that he and Diane didn't have any children. Were these children from his first marriage?
Yes.
And can you tell the jurors how many children did Mr. McIver have?
3.
3. And can you tell the jurors, based on your close personal relationship with the defendant, and also Diane, that you have some understanding about the relationship that Mr. McIver had with his 3 children?
The older
Let
two.
me object to that. I think that would certainly call for hearsay, and there would certainly be assertions. And I don't think it is redirect.
So what was the last part? You tailed
Don't
up.
think it's redirect.
Okay. It is redirect, but I didn't follow the source of the information. If it's from Mr. McIver, you may press on. If it's not, then I will sustain
It was an
some
awful
parts
question.
of the multi-prong objection.
Right. Did you talk to or have any conversations over the course of the many years that you knew the defendant? Did you have conversations with him about the state of his relationship with his children?
Not really.
Okay. Those conversations would have been had with whom?
Diane.
Okay. So I won't ask you about that. Let me ask you this. Who was Robbie?
His youngest son.
And can you tell the jurors who's next oldest? Do you know?
I think the girl.
Okay.
And I don't know her name right away.
Okay. And the third child?
I don't know his name.
Okay.
His boy
Okay.
name.
Do you know his occupation?
I believe he's a doctor.
Okay. And can you tell the jury, in the many, many years, the hundreds of times that you have gone to the ranch, have you ever seen the oldest son, the doctor, come to the ranch?
No.
Never.
Never.
How about the middle daughter?
No.
Never.
Never.
How about Robbie?
I'm sure he was there at some point when I was there, but he didn't really come down.
You didn't come down.
No.
And the phone conversation that you had with the defendant about leaving the ranch to Austin and nothing to his own kids, when did he tell you that?
Oh, you didn't ask the answer.
What I had.
No, you didn't ask the answer.
Mr. Rucker asked it?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm remembering otherwise, so you can ask it.
When did he tell you that?
Well, it was right around, it was a day or two after, no, before the auction, not the auction, but the sale of Diane's clothes. And I can't remember when that was.
Did he explain to you why he was revising his will to leave the ranch to Austin and nothing to his kids? Did he tell you why?
No. Well, he did mention that it was what Diane's wishes were.
Okay. And when he told you that he was going to do this by leaving the ranch to Austin and nothing to his own kids, was this conversation that he had with you, it was after you had, as Mr. Harvey said, confronted him at the flag football game?
Yes.
As
Yes.
And when did that occur?
I don't know. I don't know.
And so when he asked you to go with him to have his will revised, what did you say?
Well, Well, at first I said yes, because it was easier to say yes and then not say no, and I was kind of curious what was going to happen, and then I called my attorney and asked him what he thought about it. And he
Don't
said-
tell me what he said.
Okay.
What's the name of the attorney you called?
Lee Davis.
Okay. And when you spoke to Mr. Davis, did you go with Mr. McIver to have his will revised?
I did not.
You did not. Now, let me ask you, when you told Mr. Harvey that Tex wanted you to tell him what you remember that?
Yes.
Speaking about the day you were in the bedroom in the condo, he had the legal pad,
Yes.
right? And would that have been the first time that you would have shared with the defendant your, as you call them, memories about what happened?
Yes.
And you remember that that conversation with him in the bedroom occurred on what day?
Tuesday.
Tuesday. And to the best of your information and knowledge personally, do you know whether or not the defendant had spoken to any law enforcement at that time?
I didn't know.
You didn't know.
No.
While you were at the hospital, did he speak to any law enforcement?
Not that I was aware of.
I got a lot more. And I'm not going to be able to finish. It's already 5 o'clock. I'm going to ask for a little indulgence just so I can kind of wrap my brain and perhaps structure my redirect a little bit better so it'll go a whole lot faster if we could reconvene tomorrow morning.
Well, we will for sure be reconvening tomorrow morning. Unless you're about to announce you're going to arrest, and then who knows what the defense will do.
No.
But I know better than that. All right, it's 5. You all, jurors, have put in another long day, as have you, Ms. Carter. So let's do this. First, Ms. Carter, you are free to go for now. We'll need you back at 9 tomorrow, okay? Don't talk about the case with anyone between now and then, okay?
Yes. That's all the problem.
It's all right? So we'll see you tomorrow. Jurors, let's talk scheduling for a minute. It is my understanding that Saturday is a non-starter for any number of reasonable possibilities. We don't need to articulate them. But you guys are working hard to line up days where you could stay as late as 6 fingers. That would include this Thursday and next Tuesday and next Thursday. So we've got at least 3 days where you all can stay at least until 6. And you all are trying to shuffle things around to see if for other days between now and the end of next week you could stay until 6. Is that a fair summary of all the logistical work you've been doing? Any updates? Okay. Well, first, I appreciate you moving things around. What I told you way back when was that we typically would run from 9 until 5, and you are willing to extend that. And I know that comes at a sacrifice to you all in any number of ways. So thank you for doing that. It means we'll get more in each day. And you are also willing to work on shorter lunches. So thank you for that. We will pick up tomorrow and at 9 a.m. with Ms. Carter back on the stand. We will finish with Ms. Carter tomorrow morning It will be AM when we're done with Ms. Carter. That's my commitment to you all, and Mr. Rucker has moved in that direction as well, because he's going to get organized tonight. And then we'll see where the state goes after Mrs. Carter. So, enjoy your Tuesday evening, come back refreshed for Wednesday. Everything working with the jury room, the appliances, the space, the 5 million snacks you brought in, that's working out okay? If anything isn't working back there, let Deputy Kane or Deputy Murphy know, and we'll have someone attend to it. We've had the county manager drop by, we've had the chairman of the county commission drop by to make sure we are having this flow smoothly. So if there's something you all need other than the trial to end, we can try to make that happen. Okay? Thank you.
All rise for the jury. You may be seated.
Mr. Rucker, anything else from the state before we break today?
No, I expect to have a report for you though in the AM regarding our efforts to track down on the motion to quash
Okay.
any other available witnesses.
So, and available is pretty broadly defined, so if you learn there were 3 deputies standing right there, but we can't find them right now, that doesn't necessarily satisfy, actually I don't know, that doesn't necessarily satisfy the burden that the case law says that the
Right.
state, that the proponent would need to meet in the face of continued media opposition.
Right.
But once I get that report, then we'll figure out a time to get those lawyers back here so that we can talk more about the media's concerns about the state's requests. All right. And hopefully sometime tonight, because Mr. Samuel has been here, but maybe would have had some time to be thinking about Mr. McIver and the lawyer's statement to law enforcement.
It's not really a problem.
Great.
I mean, I've looked at everything you did. I don't want to waste your time, but my pages all got lost. Got shifted because I was writing on it and I didn't realize it was a Word document. I thought it was PDF, so all of a sudden everything changed.
Got it.
But everything that I looked at, nothing made a comment here or there.
Okay, but the heartburn level is very low about the way we would get through this.
Your comfort level should be very high.
Okay, super. I think that was one of the other projects for the state. Anything else? No? All right, so you'll get focused tonight, Mr. Rucker, for your redirect. Defense, anything? You're just ready to go home. That's the bye-bye? Okay. Well, thank you all. You, Mr. Rucker, Mr. Harvey, were on your feet a great deal today. So ice the knees or hips or whatever it is, and we'll see you tomorrow a little before 9 o'clock. And thank you, Madam Court Reporter. We didn't mean to try to start without you earlier. It's just one place I didn't check. I checked with everyone else.
Sorry about that.
Okay.